You're sweet.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July 10th, 2019 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We'll call the meeting to order, and we do have a quorum present. We need to approve the minutes of the June 5th, 2019 and the June 19th, 2019 Planning Commission meetings. Any additional corrections to any of those minutes? If not, we will take those approved as submitted. We have public hearings tonight. I did not count how many, but it's quite a few on there. So our first public hearing tonight is a zoning application for 2,348 lots, as shown on the accompanying map, to be rezoned City Core Overlay, CCO. Murfreesboro Planning Department is the applicant. And Mr. Anthony.
I think I'll take that one.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. As many of you know, we initiated an expansion project for the City Core Overlay, or the CCO district, over a year ago. We've actually put about a year and a half of work into that. The text amendment aspect of that, which created would create the new standards for the CCO district, was reviewed by the Planning Commission a few months ago. It is now with the City Council. The text amendment closely follows the recommendations of the North Highland Avenue and Historic Bottom studies, both of which were adopted by the Commission in 2017 following extensive public outreach efforts. Between those studies and the zoning map amendment, we have held a total of 7 highly publicized meetings to discuss the community's vision for downtown. Additionally, we've had numerous meetings with various groups representing various segments, including downtown business owners. Altogether, we've poured about the city, not just we, but the city as a whole has poured about 3.5 years into this effort. Since mailing out this notice, which I think a bunch of people behind me will recognize, we've heard from several people who have questions or don't understand the full purpose of the overlay. In addition to that, we've seen, quite honestly, an incredible and disheartening amount of misinformation spread on social media, and we simply do not have the resources to combat that. We cannot spend every day answering every wrong thing that we read. So despite all of the public outreach that we've tried to do, I can tell you that I'm not content to let this overlay move forward without getting the support of the people who will be most affected by it. We'll go to whatever lengths we need to go to in order to better explain the overlay, answer citizens' questions, and make whatever changes are necessary to the text, which has not been approved by the City Council yet, as well as the map. We want this overlay to work for the people who will be most affected by it. We want them to see that it actually will benefit them, that it is not something geared toward taking anybody's rights away. It's actually expanding rights. With that being said, I'm going to ask that this item be deferred indefinitely. We're going to try to schedule some additional public meetings and rework the ordinance to ensure that it's fair and equitable and reasonable to all of those who are affected by it. I would have simply just withdrawn the application, but we did advertise for a public hearing, and so we probably need to move forward with that. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Any questions before we start with the public hearing? Okay, so thank you to everyone that's come out tonight to speak on this. So as you heard, we would very much like to hear your input on this. And so we will have the public hearing, and sounds like we will then defer this matter at that time once we've heard all of your input. So if you haven't been to one of our public hearings before, we will ask you to come forward to the podium and state your name and your address, and then make your comments to the Planning Commission. Please don't make the comments to any other members of the audience. We do ask that you refrain from clapping or cheering or any of those things that just delays the time. And you can see we do have a lot of people here that want to speak tonight. So when you come forward to the podium, we do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And again, that's just to allow everyone to have time to speak. So we will go ahead and open this public hearing and ask whoever would like to come forward to speak to please do so. Don't be shy.
Oh, I'm not.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Johnny Greene, and I am concerned about the CCO regarding the Sevier Street residents. We still own a house there that belongs to my mother, and
Ms. Greene, did you state your address? I'm sorry.
it's the house that I'm speaking of is 637 East Sevier Street, Murfreesboro. I am
And
in
that's your
ownership.
mother's address,
No, ma'am,
and
she's deceased. It's my.
it is your home. Okay,
my-
perfect.
With my other siblings, we still own
Thank you
the
so
home.
much.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you. I am concerned that this is just a slow process of gentrification, that you are just trying to move out our elderly people. This is a part of our heritage. The improvements that I have seen in the neighborhood are wonderful, but they are not affordable for the people that live there that are 91 years of age or older, or even me being 66. It's not going to be affordable for them to try to obtain one of these places that they're doing. So my concern is, it seems like it's just a slow process that you're doing that. And that is a concern to each and every person here. I'm not against, new planning and updating and doing all of that. I was told that this was supposed to be an encouragement for people to redo their homes or to rebuild their homes according to set lines and setbacks that they could do now. So I would like for it to be further explained, and I'm glad that they are, putting it back until they get the hearing from all of the people, because we are concerned about our neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I didn't mention before, but while the next person's coming forward, I'll just say we will make note of any of your questions, and if we can address all those at the end of the meeting, because several of you will have some of the same questions and comments, and so we'll address all those at the end. So, somebody else gonna? There we go.
Good evening. I'm going to do a timer because if I don't, I'll talk forever here. My name is William Richey. I live at 811 North Church. I know a couple of you guys because your kids go to Oakland High School. I've been there for 27 years. We also own property at 809 North Church Street. And I just want to make sure I understood what this gentleman here said, that they are postponing the moving forward of this overlay, to which I'm glad, because my main concern, I know there's a lot of concerns, but my main concern is tear down, build 2, 4, 5 stories. You can go down here on North Church Street about 3 blocks, and there's one about 5 feet away from another house. And, I don't mind tear down and build like the neighborhood. I don't mind tear down and build 2 if it fits in the neighborhood. But, and I may be, he said that through several mailings and whatnot, you guys have tried to make people aware of this. I've only lived at where I live now for 3 years, but this is the first I've ever seen of anything of this nature. I do know that there have been several places that have been renovated and or torn down and rebuilt there on in my neighborhood on North Church. I also know at the end of North Maple there was a house there. I think it's the third one on the right there down from Blue Coast, where there was one house they tore it down. They built 9 units. My biggest concern is Murfreesboro's crowded enough as it is. And, when you build several units on one lot, all you do is bring more people in. You get more traffic. We got to build more schools. You got to hire more police. And that's my biggest concern is the overcrowding. I started school at MTSU in 1986. And Murfreesboro was growing then, and it's still growing. And that, I don't know, but you can't hardly get down Memorial, can't hardly get down, South Church, Old Fort, Broad Street. And I just see this, and this is just my personal opinion. I'm just a simple coach and teacher. I don't know a whole lot. I do know that Mr. Halliburton has a great laugh. We can get him to laugh for us. He has an awesome laugh. And his son is in the Italian Mafia, so if you don't know his son, you better watch out for him. But anyway, I don't know a whole lot, but I do know that or this is what I feel and what I believe, is that we don't need more downtown, you know, like I said, fixing it up. That's great. There's been a lot of places that have been fixed up on our street. There's builders here that buy one and fix it. You know, that's awesome. You know, and that increases property value and all the good things that come along with that. But I just don't, I mean, I see building, as my daughter calls them in Nashville, tall skinnies everywhere, like they're doing in Nashville. We're not Nashville, and we don't need that. And like I said, I may be wrong in what I'm seeing with the little map you sent out and all that, but I just would urge us to not do something that's going to allow us to build stuff like that everywhere. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Jim Frasier. I'm pastor of Oakland's Baptist Church located at 530 North Manny Avenue. So my concern is, what effect would this city core overlay have on our church property? I see on the mail out here that each land use, lot layout, building design would be affected by CCO regulations, whatever they are. It says that if you go on the website, they're there, but I didn't find them. I went through the entire website, didn't see anything of CCO regulations. So my question is, if this goes forward, what effect will it have on our church? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn Sneed Lester. I live at 602 East Vine Street. And my question is that I see that this is adaptive reuse, and I see it says that additional standards are the use of traditional building materials such as brick, stone, or cementitious siding is required. It also says that you need front-loaded garages and whatnot. My house sits on the corner there, and there's not any room to build a garage to it. But I also know that on the corner of Hancock and Vine, there are 3 buildings there that have been newly constructed. And I see that they seemingly meet what you say for additional standards. What would happen to my home as far as this adaptive reuse is concerned? And I own the home and plan to stay there for a while. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening. I'm Cathy Clark. I live on 135 Cherry Lane. We're in the historic area and been there for 20 years, I guess. Through the years, we have thought that that historic overlay added a little bit of protection to the existing character of the neighborhood, but there have been several attempts to add apartment complexes on Lytle by MTSU, to widen Lytle, to significantly destroy the more historic part of the neighborhood. So when we got this in the mail, I thought, oh no, what now? You know, we love the downtown. We love the neighborhoods. We walk it. We feel very lucky to live in this area, but we're concerned about destroying something that this town is really lucky to have by overbuilding multi-unit complexes where they probably shouldn't be. And we don't know what kind of restrictions you guys are talking about. We don't want to force people out. We don't want to change the very nature of the neighborhoods. So we're just concerned. We'd love to know more. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Holloway, 2523 Middle Tennessee Boulevard. Well, we're not known recently here in Murfreesboro for taking on small issues, where this is another large one we have here. What I don't understand, and I think the public doesn't understand, is you've got this amount of lots, and then you also say you've got 11 different patterned districts with each regulations within each of those 11 districts. The website doesn't make that clear either. So you're trying to do a core overlay, but within the core overlay, you've got 11 districts and then 11 different regulations for each one of those districts. So I just think that somebody in the planning department ought to make that a little bit more clear on the website or to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody else?
My name is Mel Bar Simmons, and I'm concerned about the property at 726 Minor Street. And I've just heard a lot of stuff going on, so I just want to know what's going on and how would it be rezoned. I realize that they have already remodeled one house on the street, so I was just wondering how would the other houses in the neighborhood, how would that affect this rezoning?
Thank you. Anybody else? Here we go.
Hi, my name's Lokilani Tangora. I live at 450 East State Street. I just caught wind of what is going on here, so I'm not quite sure what everything entails, and I will do some research. But so far, I've heard that there's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of updating, which is great. I'd like to know who will be funding this. That's my question.
Anybody else? Last chance. Okay.
My husband and I own 809 and 811 North Church Street. And if you look at our house.
And your name is?
I'm Cynthia Ricci. I apologize. And we live off of Church Street. I own a business on the corner of Oak and Maple Street, so everything is in that tight vicinity. If you look at the property, there's a beautiful magnolia, and we could knock it down, probably put about 4 houses right there, so it would benefit us. But that's the last thing I want to see for our town. So I don't know what this is going to do, how many people are going to come in and overdevelop our area, but I'm a 3rd generation at this town. And I grew up on Bell Street, playing on campus playground, and I love this area, and I want to keep it looking. I would love for it to see it stay this way. I don't want to look like Nashville, or at least this area, the downtown area where it's got history and my history. So I just wanted to speak that, and I know that it financially would do me good and my property value, but I speak that I don't want to see this. I want to see the history stay. I mean, my house was built in 1917, and it was the original house. And then during the Depression, my house was built, and I love that. I love that when my husband was putting, he was working on something underneath our crawl space up at the back of our house. He put his hand down and found a bullet that was, a military. It was during the Civil War, and things like that. That just I don't want to disrupt and see. So that's my piece, and I appreciate you. And I'm sorry I was tardy. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I identified myself already. Let me ask one other question. It's my understanding that zoning application 2019-415 has been deferred indefinitely. Is that correct?
Did you speak earlier?
Yes.
All right.
May I speak again?
No, sir. Sorry.
Why not?
Because everybody gets to come up one time.
Is someone else waiting to speak?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interfere with anybody. I thought you were about to close out on this.
I am going to close out after everybody gets their chance to speak.
Good evening, Aurelia Holden. I live at 115 Gale Lane. I've only lived, I was born in Rutherford Hospital. I think I've only lived half a mile from where I was born, so you can say I've grown up downtown. I want to thank you all for your consideration and for deferring it. I have followed the process somewhat. I think I lost a few steps in the way. I remember some meetings at Central early on and the old hospital building, trying to keep up with this. When I'm looking at the plan, I have to refer to what Mr. Holloway said. It's confusing because you have a number of, there's a historic district, there's a historic overlay, there's a corridor that goes from Maine and College, there's one that goes out Manny, and in trying to figure out whose houses are in and exactly what it covers, you can see the big overlay, but you don't see exactly the small maps when I've gone in, and I've downloaded both copies of the user-friendly one and the long one that's 57, 58 pages, whatever it is, and a little bit hard to get through. But I appreciate you all doing it. I have a number of questions still, some concerns. One of them being, doesn't affect me, and I'm not speaking for anyone, but there are 4 houses in the Main Street Historic District that go through to Vine Street, and yet they're in the transitional zoning area. They defer to Vine Street as a lower level of protection or zoning for the overlay as opposed to deferring to Main Street, which is where the primary residence is and the primary building on the property is. There are a number of others. Downtown, I've watched a lot of people coming in and investing money in these properties that you thought, neighborhoods that were sort of, you just drove past and ignored, and all of a sudden, people have put probably hundreds of thousands of dollars into reliving downtown, into fixing up, into doing, and the idea that something's coming in where all of a sudden there's something next door that they've made an investment, they've made a commitment to Murfreesboro, and it's changed. So you all are our guardians for protecting us from all of this and seeing that there's a balance between the growth and everything. So thank you for deferring it, because I have some more questions, and the planning staff has been very kind when I was down there and asked them and answered some of them, but I still have some more. So I appreciate you all deferring it, and I look forward to the notice in the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Marc Highland. My wife and I have lived at 721 North Spring Street for 35 years. Love the neighborhood. What this reminds me of is when we, several years ago, went through another overlay project called the Manning Avenue overlay. And at that time, there was a lot of outrage, a lot of mistrust in what would happen. I think a lot of people, at least myself, I'll speak for myself and my wife, the thing that we really, really like about this neighborhood is that we don't have a homeowners association. And each of these overlay projects seems to put us into that boat where we're going to have a homeowners association. It'll just be called an overlay project. It's a city. And for me, I just want the neighborhood to stay the way it is, the way it has always been. Don't change anything. Leave it alone. It's wonderful the way it is. I believe that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Highland.
Good evening. My name is Dorothy Nox, and I am standing here on behalf of my mother and my grandmother, who is absent, and a great aunt of mine who is absent. And we've not, to my knowledge, received any information in the mail, and so they are wondering what is going to be happening to their properties. So if I could give you their addresses, we would like to know that. 415 East Castle Street, 208 South Bilbro Avenue, and 512 Reed Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dorothy Nox, and I live at 309 First Avenue. I have been in Murfreesboro all of my life. So when I moved to First Avenue in 1981, I've tried to keep my property up. So I want to know if you rezone, which I've seen a lot of people coming in, redoing some houses, and then they change the price. So I know that, you know, that makes the property value go up. But I'm wondering if we're just a homeowner, how can we get the, if I can't afford as a retired person, how can I get a loan maybe or something to upgrade my house? And it doesn't, my house is not, I keep my house pretty upgraded. But when I see them come in and do 2 or 3 houses on my street, and you know, I don't know what they call it, flipping, but I want to do the same thing for my house, because I can't sell my house. I have to live in my house. So I want to know if you're rezoning, what would that do to just the homeowners that are there that just can't just move out, let somebody flip their house, and then, you know, what do I expect somebody to tell me what is going to go on with the people who own the houses that cannot move out.
Thank you, Ms. Knox. Anybody else? Okay. Close that public hearing. And if we can address some of the issues that we heard, and then we'll go on with our vote.
Sure, I'll be happy to go through a few of the ones that I heard. So I think what's important to know about this overlay, if it ever gets approved in the future, it's primarily a design overlay. The standards that are contained within this overlay would apply to new construction only. It would not require anyone to do anything to any existing structure. I think one of the things that's very important about this overlay that has been overlooked somewhat is that it includes a one-time exception to having to meet any of the new standards. So if your house were to be completely destroyed, you would be able to build it back exactly as it was, despite the fact that the way that it was doesn't meet zoning standards. No other property in the city has that guarantee, not a single one. This overlay would provide a protection that nobody else has, and it would be just for downtown.
And Mr. Anthony, can I clarify on that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That would just be for the current owner. If they
Correct.
sold it to a different...
Actually, no. Our plan is to record that in a database by address, not by
address.
person. Not by person.
Okay, thank
Right.
you for the clarification.
We have not proposed any change to any underlying zoning. The concerns that a couple of people brought up about not wanting a house that towers over theirs, not wanting something that's very different from their neighborhood, I agree with them. That's why we put this overlay together. This overlay gives a layer of protection to people in the downtown area, again, that no one else has. When a new building is built next to yours, it can only, the highest it can go is 50% over the height of your house. So if you have a 1-story house, the neighbor's house, they can go up to 2 stories because the 1.5 is not really a viable thing. If you have a 2-story house, your neighbor's house can go up to 3. Right now, through the plan development process, somebody can come in and want to put a 6-story house next to your 1-story house. This would give a little bit different protection, and I hate. This is one of the things that I talked about earlier with sort of the misinformation that's bouncing around in the community right now. I hate that this kind of information simply has not been able to circulate as well as the misinformation has. I wish that people understood that the entire point of this overlay is to protect their property, enhance their property, help them. It is not to hurt them or to push anyone out or to gentrify or anything of that sort. It is to protect their property. This is not a homeowners association. There are no changes proposed with this. There is no funding needed to enact an overlay district. This simply would regulate the design of new structures in this area. As far as the website goes and people having problems with the website, the mailer that we sent out had a website address. I have pulled up the address. I am looking at the City Core overlay standards. As far as them being too difficult to read, we created a citizen guidebook that is 10 pages in length. And all you have to do is read the one page that applies to your property, and it contains all of the important standards on that one page. We spent a lot of time putting that together, and I'm very sorry that information about that has not made it out to the community like I wish that it would have. Fortunately, if you'll defer this evening, we'll have the opportunity to try again to convey this information to the community. I absolutely hate having to defer it and knowing that what we're doing is trying to help and protect property owners, but we'll be happy to put it off, and we'll ask you to do that this evening.
And can I ask, when you are trying to reach this large group of people and you don't do a mailer for every single meeting that you have, what is the place that they should be watching to find out about the meetings and so that they can know when the next ones are scheduled?
I appreciate that. We will obviously run things on city TV. We will put things on the planning department website. So it's murfreesborotn.gov/planning. That's the site always to go to for planning news. We'll also ask Mike Browning to run information on the city's general website, which is murfreesborotn.gov. Those are our primary ways. When we sent these mailers out, we had to send out to 1,800 people, and so as you can imagine, that is a pricey endeavor. But it may be important enough that we need to do that a time or two, and I'll be okay with that.
Questions, comments?
Just make a general comment. I know the staff has worked very hard on this. I think the origins of this, the first time I saw it, came through the Historic Zoning Commission, I think is where it was first mentioned. But I know we've had public hearings downtown, or public opportunities for input downtown, and it's been through planning several times as well. And so I think, Mr. Anthony, I know it can be frustrating to go through this process and invest that time, but the good thing about this is, because of the spirit behind what we're trying to do, I think it's an opportunity to turn, to create a lot of goodwill with the people that are here. So I think that's a win for us, and I think they will see it as much. So I'm happy to make a motion to defer unless there are other comments.
Any other comments before we have a motion? All right, Mr. Mark.
Make a motion to defer. Do we want to set a specific date or just generally speaking?
Indefinitely.
Okay, we'll just indefinitely defer.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the motion has been indefinitely deferred, and hopefully everybody will get notice some way, or try to watch the website for additional information that'll be coming forth about this. So thank you so much for coming out, to all of you all that came to speak on this item. So our second public hearing tonight will be a zoning application to amend the Spring Creek PRD to increase the number of single-family attached units on approximately 74.5 acres located along Asbury Lane. Beezer Homes is the applicant. Ms. Greene.
Thank you. This next public hearing is for you to consider an existing PRD, Planned Residential District zoning, for property that's located along Asbury Lane. And the property is currently under development and is known as Spring Creek, and the PRD is Spring Creek PRD. The property itself is rather large. It's almost 75 acres, but a large portion of that is inundated with the floodplain and floodway and not under development. The project was approved as a PRD in 2006, which was just before an economic recession, and then it sat undeveloped for quite some time. There have been a couple amendments to the planned development since that time to create the plan that you see today. The existing PRD allows 48 single-family detached lots on the north side of the property. and it allows 90 single-family attached, and a single-family attached is another way of saying townhomes. The plan before you today is to, the applicants came to staff and were interested in offering a smaller, slightly smaller townhome, so it doesn't affect the single-family detached or your regular single-family homes, but they'd like to reduce the width of some townhomes from 24 feet wide to 20 feet wide. That would still meet the same minimum square footage requirements that has always been required, but we did require a minimum of 24 feet in the current PRD. By reducing some of the units to be constructed from 24 to 20 feet, they can increase the number of units by 11 units. So this would increase the density by 11 units in the townhome portion, and so that's the most significant change. At the workshop, Planning Commission did discuss this matter and determined that although they had gotten an exception to the requirement that a compactor be installed for the single-family attached portion, that increasing this density was enough of a trigger to require them to go ahead and add a compactor. So they've revised the book with that in mind. The applicant's representative is here this evening. I believe he's got a few words, after which you should conduct a public hearing prior to making your recommendation to City Council. I, of course, am available for any questions you may have.
My name is Matt Williams, and I'm here on behalf of Beezer Homes, and thank you, Ms. Greene, for that explanation, and thank you, Commission, for hearing our case tonight. In the main reason that we are pursuing this revision to the PRD is to further diversify the current plan from its original. So in 2006, this plan consisted mainly of all townhomes, and in 2016, Beezer was successful coming before this body and diversifying the project into single family and townhome to give a mix of product that better fit the character of the area. And this application for a variance or for an amendment is to add another townhome product to serve 3 different buying groups. So, and add 3 different price points to our community. Since opening in 2016, since opening in 2018, in our first 10 months, we've only seen about 1 unit a month of activity on our current townhome product. So with 90 townhomes, you can imagine that's a pretty long project if we continue that pace. So studying the buyer traffic we're seeing in our community, we see the need to add another option for a buying group in that area and to serve, it's just 200 square foot smaller, but it gives us the ability to add another price point and to serve the buyer that we're seeing come in our community today. So, but even though this unit is 4 foot narrower in width, 200 square foot smaller, architecturally from the exterior, it still meets the character of the previously approved townhome product. So the architectural standards that we had before that you'll see in the back of the pattern book are very similar on the new product, as well as the 1-car garage and a lot of the other previous requirements. So, and I'll be happy to answer any questions from the commission as well. I would like to note, I forgot, that we did host an informal meeting with our current townhome residents. We have 10 units already closed. We presented this to our current residents as well, and it was received positively, and we actually received no negative feedback. So I thought it was important to point that out as well.
Any questions for Mr. Williams before we open the public hearing? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will open the public hearing on this item and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak.
Hello, I'm Quentin McDonald. I'm a hydrogeologist, geologist, and I'm here representing Karen Bauer and Nancy Wright. They live at 3507 Ashbury Lane. As a general regard to this zoning issue, they don't oppose the issue at all, but they are concerned about stormwater issues. There was a prior construction, Beezer started, and after that occurred, they started experiencing a large amount of flooding on their property. And so what they want to do is make sure that the commission and all parties involved, the city engineers, look at the stormwater holistically throughout Ashbury Lane. The reality is Ashbury Lane is going to change a lot over a pretty short period of time. There are several developments there. There's the Kingsbury development that is underway, as well as this one. And collectively, those are going to affect the stormwater throughout the whole street and throughout the area, in fact, the whole area of Overland Creek, Overall Creek. So really what we would like to do is work with Beazer. We'd like to work with the city. We'd like to work with all parties involved to try to come up with a approach that prevents stormwater affecting any one party. As it is right now, Karen and Nancy's property, the only time they can recall the property flooding was back in May 2010 when the large flood occurred. And I've looked at the property, I've walked it, and you know, there are some low-lying areas, but the way things are engineered right now, it is receiving a lot of water that it didn't used to receive, based on the most recent construction for the widening of the area for the Beazer property. And that's causing more systemic flooding, and it's preventing them from using the land as they would like to use it. So going forward, I guess what we would like to do is offer the opportunity to work with everybody and try to come up with a plan that not only addresses their property, but prevents other properties from being the receiver of water that they don't need to receive. So basically, we're offering to be involved with the process and to help with whoever's involved, and we look forward to working with you guys.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody else want to speak on this item?
Howdy, everybody. My name is Sherry Brown, and I live at 3818 Asbury Road, which is at the corner of Asbury Lane and Asbury Road. I had a couple of conversations with, I'm a tenant, by the way. I do not own this property. I spoke with the owners of the property, my landlord, and we feel that first of all, I want to say to you, sir, congratulations. This is a beautiful development. Take a tour. I was amazed. It's beautifully designed inside and outside. And all of the contractors and subcontractors were fantastic. I drive that road back and forth several times a day. All the widening of the road, putting in the turning lane, everybody was fantastic. So now I have a little clearer understanding, I think, of the request to amend and go to 20 feet. Just looking, I do have the proposal here, and tonight I haven't been listening to your first one. I've been trying to get into this. I found it a little confusing because at first I thought I read that the square footage would remain the same, but this gentleman just stated that there would be a loss of 200 square feet. Yeah, that's a small amount of square footage. You could probably, you know, sell it for a little bit less. I don't particularly care about any of that. My concern is traffic. Okay, so he just stated that there are currently 10 units occupied. There are days, I mean, I almost said Nashville is growing. Murfreesboro is growing like crazy. I have been here since 2012, downtown in that overlay district, so I followed that a little bit. But now I'm up by Medical Center Parkway. And in that amount of time, that whole area has just blossomed. And congratulations to all of you. Hopefully it was all well thought out in your planning, your purchasing, your selling. But I think the traffic situation was not necessarily addressed adequately to handle the amount of growth that you have allowed. We literally cannot take a left-hand turn onto Asbury Lane at certain times of the day. I've timed it many times over different months, and it can take 5 minutes sitting there before you get enough of a space to hopefully gun it to get across 3 lanes of traffic. So that's difficult. So what that's doing is that it's changing the traffic pattern. So if I'm coming from the south on the highway and I exit, hey, I want to turn onto Asbury Lane. Well, I can't. My choice is drive down a little bit, turn right into Conference Center, or whatever the road is there, with all the hotels. We turn in there, do a loop, and come out at the light. Well, I'm not the only smart one around. Everybody else is doing that as well. So what started, I've been at this property for about 2.5 years. 2.5 years ago, not many people were doing that. And so there was enough of a gap when that light changed, and there might have been 1 or 2 cars that would take a left and head back up towards the highway. So it would allow enough of a gap for traffic to try to cross. People that exit Asbury Lane onto Medical Center and vice versa, but no more. We literally are forced to go out of our way, avoid that dreaded left-hand turn that you can't take in the city anymore. And what's even worse is that sometimes I can't even take a right. And I sit there for minutes and minutes and minutes. I'm a smoker. I smoke half a cigarette, and I'm just waiting for the traffic to clear enough, because the speed limit's 40 miles an hour. You're at a dead stop. You have to make a sharp, fast right turn. And you need a good amount of space to be able to do that safely, right? So if I want to take a left and say head towards the avenue, sometimes I have to take a right-hand turn, cross the highway, pull into the gas station, scoot around all the pumps, stop and decide, is there a way that I can take that left again, that dreaded left?
Okay.
Or do I have to take a right, then take a left into Walmart, turn around, get back onto that road?
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Is there something next, a next item other than the traffic?
I want to wrap up. So you want to add 10 or 11, and I'm a little confused as to which the number is, 10 or 11. But total plan for 148 units, based on the calculations shown for vehicle capacity, you're talking 780 trips a day just by that development. And as it was mentioned, we have a very large development that is just getting underway. They're doing sewer and water now. People are using Hoard Road, Asbury Road as a connector off of Nashville. I personally would like to see some kind of a study, a traffic study, to see what volume we have now. So for myself, despite it being a wonderful development, I would not approve additional units, because I don't think the area can handle it traffic-wise. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Anyone else that would like to speak on this item? Okay. We will close the public hearing on that. And Ms. Greene, what do you think there?
Yeah, sure. We appreciate people being involved in the process, and as a matter of fact, I think we in the Development Services Department have had contact with both people who spoke tonight.
Okay.
The property owner across the street at 3507 Asbury Lane has, for at least the last year, I know, been in contact with our Assistant City Engineer, our Development Services Director, and we've studied together and talked about what they are anecdotally seeing on their property, the water and the drainage, and I appreciate the offer to continue to work with us. That's certainly what we would like from them as well. I think that it's, easy to say this one thing's changed, so it's the cause of water being on my property. But I think when we researched the property, it was really cleaning out some backed up pipes and water that was naturally going there anyway. But it's certainly something that is important to us, and we want to know the effects of development, and we study them even before approving the plan. And so I would welcome that offer for our department to continue to be involved with us. I know Mr. Huddleston's spoken with her as well. And so we would appreciate that. And that is the property, the larger property just across the street, if you didn't know where that address was. And I did speak to Ms. Brown, and she has a valid concern about that intersection of Asbury Lane. I mean, we've all lived here for quite a long time and know there's no way you're turning left there, and I don't think that's the city's expectation, maybe that you will have to. That is an existing drive that was there before the interstate interchange was placed there. We know it's too close to the intersection for signalization, and it's not really operating at its best. There was some study, of course, in the traffic patterns, and our major transportation plan that was adopted with our long-range plan does call for some changes in the traffic network there. Basically, Conference Center Boulevard would extend to the north across a large farm that is not developed, but we anticipate maybe one day being developed, and then connecting the road so they can come to that signalized intersection, future signalized intersection. It is identified as a midterm improvement, meaning it's not short-term, so it's not something that we have funding or design for, but it's certainly something that we've got in our plans, and we require any future development to comply with that. I think it's MTI 6, Midterm Improvement 6, and that would be a better location for an access drive. I don't know what would happen to the existing Asbury Lane, but you definitely wouldn't be coming off of Asbury Lane and turning left, or coming off the interstate and turning left onto the road, and we know that. I don't think we, as staff, believed that the increase in density for just this change was enough to say no, 11 units is a tipping point at this point. But certainly, if you looked at any future zoning changes, you would probably want to see what the impact would be and require traffic analysis at that point. At this stage, we did not ask these applicants to provide a traffic analysis because we don't think it would be that significantly different. I think that you probably remember testimony from when we considered this before, where folks would actually go to the north and then come over and come down Wilkinson Pike because they wanted to avoid the Asbury Lane intersection. And of course, those are all public roads and they're welcome to do that, but we are aware that that's not the best situation. And we do have plans, although they are not imminent, for improvement there. The discrepancy in the square footage, the developer has built more than the minimum required in the program book. The square footages are larger than our minimum stated. Even by reducing the width, they'll be larger than our minimum stated, but they're smaller than what he's actually building. So it's smaller than what he's building, but in all cases, the minimum in the PRD book isn't changing. So that's the discrepancy. They gave us a number, and I can't quite remember it. I'm sure that they can. Here it is. I think 1,250, 1,250, and that's not changing. Everything they're building is bigger than that anyway. So that's sort of why there's a discrepancy, because I just referenced the minimum requirement, and they're just referencing what they're actually building.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Greene.
Sure.
What other comments or questions?
Just make a general comment. I know the Bowers have gone through the effort to come to this public hearing tonight and bring a hydrologist with them. Have we, as a staff, met with that individual related to these water issues?
Not that I'm aware of. Not with him, just with the Bowers.
I would like, just as a courtesy to Karen and the gentleman that took the time to come, for at least to have that conversation with them. And I know they've had some concerns, and we may not be in agreement on exactly that situation, but I do think at least make an effort to hear what they have to say on that and come to some final decision on that.
Sure.
Overall, creek's flowing to the north through this property, right?
Yes. I'm looking at Sam Huddleston after that. I cannot answer that question.
So theoretically, I mean, if they dammed, if the construction problem caused a dam, it would reduce the amount of water downstream towards Asbury Road. And if the only thing that they could do would be theoretically be able to have more watershed that would maybe feed into the creek that would have an increase. I'm trying to figure out how there's a greater amount of water flow downstream today than there was before this project was begun. And they're not, they've got detention ponds and retention ponds on this property, so theoretically it should have improved the situation, not made it worse. So I'm struggling to understand how it's releasing more water downstream. And I know we've had some heavy rainfalls in the last year, and especially in that area out there. So, you know, to say that it's a once in a decade event may be a true situation that we've had a once in a decade event in the last 12 months. But I'm a little bit confused as to why there would be more water flowing downstream because of this project.
I'm not sure I completely understand tonight, but I do know in the past something that was concerned is, I think there was the more water, it looked like there was more water, was because this property started being maintained and they cleaned out the pipes that go under the road, because this the Bowers are across the street, so when they cleaned out those clogged pipes, water can free flow. And so it wasn't so much the actual creek or river, it was normal drainage that was designed that way and just hadn't been maintained. The last conversation I have, but certainly we can meet with the geologist again and see if there's something that we've missed besides that. But when I talked to them, it was really just a matter of maintenance, and now it's functioning the way it was designed, whereas it hadn't been.
So it's really not the water that's flowing off to the west side of the property, it's the water that's flowing off to the east side and going across the road then?
That's my understanding.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Any other questions? Comments?
If there are none, I make a motion that we approve, subject to all staff comments.
Is there a second? Second. Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Our next item is a zoning application for approximately 2.2 acres located along Manson Pike to be rezoned from RM16 and GDO1 to CF and GDO1. Egbert Ribeiro, applicant. Ms. Greene.
Thank you. This next item is a request to change zoning for property that's currently zoned for multifamily residential purposes. The property is zoned RM16, that's multifamily residential, and allows a density of 16 dwelling units per acre for each acre that they have, and the property is 2.2 acres, so of course that would be the permitted density. The surrounding zoning to the south is also zoned RM16, is actually an underdevelopment apartment complex, and to the west is a developed county subdivision that was annexed by the city, and it's zoned RS15. To the north are some agricultural uses and also another apartment complex. And then, of course, to the east is the Lancaster Daycare Center, which is newly constructed, and further to the east is the city's Gateway Overlay District. This property is also located in the Gateway Overlay District, and they're not proposing or requesting to change that. They would like it to remain in the Gateway. However, seeing how many multifamily dwellings are in this vicinity and contiguous to this property, the applicant, who does have a contract to purchase the property, is requesting a change in zone. So no longer to be zoned for multifamily purposes, but to be zoned CF, and that's Commercial Fringe District. We generally see our CF district in places that are adjacent to single-family residential uses, because there's additional standards if they are adjacent to that. It is our least intense commercial use that we have available. And I'm not aware of any specific development plans, but the applicant does believe that there's more apartment zoning here than necessary. And when they met with me to talk about it, I told them I thought that city council would be excited to reduce the amount of property zone multifamily. So to move forward with the application, the future land use map does identify this as multifamily property, and that's a reflection of the zoning. The zoning was to allow it, and so that's why it is not consistent with multifamily zoning. If you do recommend that this property be rezoned to commercial fringe, we'll update the future land use map to reflect that as well. A representative of the applicants here this evening. However, there's no presentation for it. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer, but you should conduct a public hearing prior to formulating a recommendation to City Council.
Okay. Any questions before we open the public hearing? If not, we'll open this public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this application. And seeing no one, we'll close this public hearing and ask for any other comments or questions on this item.
Just one comment from me. So the buffer between the CF and the residential, what's the size of that buffer?
I believe it's 12 feet wide currently.
You know, buffer type? The type?
It's C, I think. C or D? D.
Okay. All right.
If there are no comments, I will move to approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, our next item is a zoning application for approximately 2.5 acres located along West Northfield Boulevard and Sulphur Springs Road to be rezoned from RS10 to PCD. It's referred to as the Sanders Corner PCD. Henry and Linda Brindle applicants. Ms. Greene.
Thank you. This next item is for you to consider a zoning change application that's been made to us by the property owners, the Brindle family, and they currently own property that's zoned RS10, that's single-family residential district, with a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. The property to the north and to the west, those are zoned RS10 as well. The property just across Sulphur Springs Road, and this is on the corner of Sulphur Springs and Northfield Boulevard, West Northfield Boulevard on the northwest corner, but just across Sulphur Springs Road is Sinking Creek, and beyond Sinking Creek is an apartment complex, Saddlebrook, and then just to the south, you can see it's property zone PCD, Planned Commercial District, and that PCD is the Northfield Village PCD, which allows approximately 3/4 of the property to be developed with self-storage facility, and the rest of the property to be a commercial lot. The applicants own the property. They don't have development intentions. However, they wanted it to be zoned for commercial purposes. And we instructed them that a planned development would be the best approach, that we didn't believe that a bulk zoning would be appropriate here, as there's quite a bit of commercial highway and commercial fringe property just to the east going toward Memorial Boulevard. So they've submitted an application to you for the 2.5 acres to be zoned PCD and have called it Sanders Corner PCD. We did also ask them to have another neighborhood meeting, because they initially had submitted an application, I think, 1.5 years ago. And so on June the 25th at Kingwood Heights Church of Christ, there was a neighborhood meeting for this project. And they did develop a program book, and that should be laid out on your desks before you for you to review. At the workshop, I asked you to please look at the list of uses permitted and see if you thought they were appropriate. They did add some excluded uses or prohibited uses that I had requested. The PCD does also commit to not having service areas along the rear, which is the north of the property where the existing single-family residential is. And it allows a maximum of 2 buildings to be constructed on the property. One of the buildings just over 9,000 square feet, and the second almost 7,000 square feet. They have a 2-story appearance, but the second floor is not really a second floor. It's just to give some height. And I worked with the architect to do more of a pitched roof and hearken to the transition from commercial to residential to the north and to the west. Mr. Clyde Roundtree is here, and he's prepared a presentation regarding this change. If you have any questions, of course, I'd be happy to answer them either before the public hearing, but after the public hearing, or after his presentation, we'd like for you to hold a public hearing. We did want you to know that the self-storage is on tomorrow's building codes agenda, so it looks like they are moving forward with that across the street. I know that the very first neighborhood meeting I ever attended when I was employed here in January 2005 was for this property across the street, and so I thought maybe it might not ever develop. Since my going on 15 years here, I haven't seen anything happen, but it looks like they are actually moving forward, and they have made an application to the codes department to pull a permit. So I know that you have asked me about that in the past, and we just wanted to make sure you knew.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
Roundtree.
Mr. Roundtree.
Thank you, Margaret Ann. Chairman Jones, Commissioners, staff, my name is Clyde Roundtree, Holson Steel Engineering. Appreciate Margaret Ann's overview of the project. And I'm here on behalf of the Sanders family, Henry and Linda. And just want to this has been a journey for them. This is their own family homestead. It's their existing house on the property. And we have been back and forth on lots of different options in terms of how this property could be developed. So we appreciate the opportunity to be before you, and I'm available for any questions after the presentation, and definitely want to speak after the public hearing if there's any questions I can answer for the public. As Margaret Ann mentioned, we did have another neighborhood meeting because this process has been going on for a while. So with that in mind, just going to walk you through briefly the PowerPoint presentation. And as Margaret Ann mentioned, the biggest challenge of this piece of property is its location and zoning in relationship to the single-family residential that's down on the back portion of the property, really the north side, as well as the west side. On the eastern side, there's PUD. On the southern side, there's a PCD. So it's really kind of in that spot where rezoning seems appropriate. At our neighborhood meeting, there was still concern as, can it still be residential? Can this be a residential project? And we are really under the assumption that this is really a commercial project. We feel like we've gotten staff support in that regard, but because it is potentially a commercial project, there's been a lot of emphasis on how it's going to look. So this has gone through a lot of scrutiny in terms of architecture. And so with that in mind, we'll look forward to kind of walking you through that. As far as adjacent relationships and general character of the site, it's a wooded site right now. As I mentioned, there's a home on the property that is in dilapidated condition. Most people would know the home, and it's a fairly open lot. They've done a lot of clearing to try to upgrade the property in terms of its sellability. And so with that in mind, the biggest challenge from a traffic standpoint, kind of reflecting that, is that there is a rise on Northfield Boulevard that we have to be sensitive to, and that's been impacted with the property across the street where Margaret has mentioned the conditioned storage and our driveways are going to have to line up. So we've had to do some adjustments on our site plan to accommodate some of the road situations. As I mentioned, these pictures just reflect the existing home and its current character. The overall site plan, as mentioned, this is an old site plan that shows the church that has been torn down since, but that's where the conditioned storage is going to go, as well as 2 out parcels. Part of our process in trying to get this rezoned was really reflecting what happened across the street with that PCD. And the PCD has the climate-controlled storage identified. It has architecturals for that, but it also has 2 out parcels that are of no specific use. And so working with staff on that, we felt like it was appropriate to allow this lot to be zoned commercial through to a PCD. However, we don't have a specific user. So what we did is generate a specific plan that shows kind of the carrying capacity of the lot, what we can put on the lot, what we can park on the lot, so whoever would be potentially a developer would know exactly what the potential is for development as well as what the architecture has to look like. So we felt like that was appropriate considering the fact that across the street there's just some out parcels that have design regulations associated with them but no specific user as well. This is the site plan that, again, is conceptual in nature, but it begins to speak about potentially 2 different buildings, as Margaret had mentioned, approximately about 15 to 16,000 square feet of building potential on the site. We did want to have the option to have the buildings be basically 2 separate, so if they want to sell that corner parcel, that potential is there. Working with staff, we will have a perimeter fence on the rear portion of the property, and we'll have a type D buffer associated with that fencing as well. As I mentioned, there's a median cut that's on West Northfield Drive that has to line up with the mini storage that will be coming online. And part of the last rendition to our request was allowing for a right-hand turn lane on Sulphur Springs Road to allow that to happen. So what that is we're not committing to the turn lane, we're committing to providing the right-of-way for that turn lane to happen. And then in addition to the plan book that came up in our neighborhood meeting was working with the city engineering staff, traffic engineering, to make sure any sort of left turn out onto Northfield would be highly considered and how that would actually work. So right now there's not a restriction on the left turn, right turn out, but we did put in a note that we would work with the city traffic staff to know how best to handle that, whether it's possible or not. But right now, we just wanted to note it in the book that that's a consideration that came up during the neighborhood meeting. As far as the architecture, as Margaret mentioned, it's a two-story facade, which we're seeing a lot of. You know, it's really, the boulevard's kind of setting that standard, but where you have a false second floor, but it gives the volume of the building a lot more volume, a lot more presentation from the road. This is an interesting property, and I'm excited that the staff's excited about it because it's a well-known piece of property, but it's also has a little bit of a gateway component into a different transition area. When you get past this particular lot, you know, heading towards to the east, it's pretty much all commercial. There's some apartments, but it's mostly commercial all the way to 231. If you go past it to the west, this is really the last commercial development as you go into more of a residential component. So it really does have its place in terms of architecturally wanting to be sensitive to the residential character, and that was really their critique, because we came forth originally with architecture as much more like the Gateway, that was much more contemporary looking, a little bit more hard line, you know, those kind of elements. And after critiquing the architecture, we wanted to go with something much more residential, a lot more gable roofs, a little bit more residential character. So that's where we ended up with the materials and really the facade to try to reflect a little bit more of an architectural look versus what we had originally proposed. That was much more contemporary. With that in mind, that's the extent of the presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have. The Brindles have been very patient through this process. I appreciate their effort. I appreciate Margaret Ann's effort through the process as well. And hopefully we've gotten to a point where we can move forward. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Roundtree before we open the public hearing? Thank you, Mr. Roundtree. All right, we'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item. And I will just remind everybody that try to keep your comments to 3 minutes and state your name and your address when you come forward. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ted Sutherland. I live at 1215 Sulphur Springs Road, which borders to the north this whole piece of property. I've lived there for 10 years. I lived 8 houses down for 25 years, so I'm very well familiar with this piece of property. The piece of property has become run down lately. I understand the Brindles, you know, wanting to sell it as commercial, and it does need revitalized, I guess. I mean, the property needs something done to it. I'm not necessarily opposed to the PCD that's being the application, but I do have questions. One is, what exactly will be the buffer? What kind of landscaping, what kind of fence, how far of a distance? Is the buffer more restrictive due to a commercial lot button up to a residential lot? Also, the restricted businesses. I did see the list of what's allowed, what's not allowed, but there's no mention that I saw of prohibiting gas stations, beer sales, convenience stores, car lots, car repair. I didn't see anything in there about that being a restriction. The driveway, the main entrance, the main exit on which would be on Sulphur Springs Road, is right beside my property line. I would like to see that moved more towards Northfield if possible, but I think Clyde had mentioned that there is a minimum distance that has to be from the intersection. So, you know, I would like to see something done about that drive. I did see that, I think it was a Class D or whatever setback, but that I saw that they were wanting a 5-foot variance to make it from 20 feet to 15 feet, and I am opposed to that. In fact, I would like to see it increased if at all possible. The dumpster, it may be in the best spot that's possible, but I would like to see it moved, and also can can you make them not empty the dumpster, I guess, during the night? Can they have certain hours that they have to do it so that I'm not listening to it out my bedroom window all night? And it has been explained to me that the lighting can be controlled. And also the drainage where the barn used to be, we get runoff from the barn. Really, it's off of Northfield, the hill at Northfield. And it comes off the hill through the old barn lot and comes down through our backyard. So I would like, for that to be looked at also. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland.
Good evening. My name's Randy Johnson. I live at 615 Elliott Drive, in sight of this place. Repeat one thing that Ted brought up. We talked at a neighborhood meeting last week about restrictions on the property. We asked that the restrictions be looked at to match the restrictions on the PCD across the street, primarily prohibiting convenience store, gas station, auto sales. Those were biggies. The other thing, and I had not thought of it until Clyde mentioned a minute ago, the fact that you might develop one of these buildings and not the other. Or this could be done in phases. Is that right, Clyde? I think we need to look at the traffic situation. I know across the street, okay, when you develop part of it, you develop the whole property. Or they had to landscape the whole property. So I would hate to see half of that property developed and not the other half. So that you've got traffic ingress and egress out both sides, even though you're only building the corner lot or building the upper lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
My name is Gary Eakes. I live at 819 Trinity, which is about a good rock's throw away from this piece of property. I've been there 35 years. It's a great neighborhood, great location. We're not upscale in any way, but most of us own our home. We're older, although we do have a few young families that are taking advantage of opportunities there. It's a peaceful neighborhood. We wouldn't want to see anything come in that would create a lot of noise after bedtime. That's one of our problems. I have a few problems that, to me, just stand out. The light at Sulphur Springs and Northfield. Very dangerous situation if you're coming out of that property onto Northfield. If you're familiar with a couple of accidents that have happened on up past Battleground and Northfield. A few deaths over the last few years because people hit it to run that light. There's a curve, and then there's an accident waiting to happen. There's a little blind spot if you come up through that light, and people are going to hit that yellow light and speed up, and then you're going to have entry onto Northfield from this development, whatever it is. So that's one of my questions. The piece of property doesn't show exactly as was presented. I don't think. It comes to more of a point. There's some of that property that's just absolutely unusable if you look at it. I've looked at it and often thought about trying to buy that property. It's a nice piece of property. It's a great location. We've been told that there will be no exit onto Oak Haven. Oak Haven is a one-block street. We live on the end that joins, that hits Oak Haven, and then it's sort of a dead end. So we live in a dead-end area. I don't know that you can assure that, but from what I gather, there's some kind of right-of-way that could exist there on the end of Oak Haven, and Eddie says there's not. There is.
There is an exit.
And it's a city-owned piece of property. Am I correct? The city has a right-of-way there.
I'm not sure who
Well,
owns the property.
maybe you can address that later, but we wouldn't want traffic to back off onto Oak Haven and come on the short end of Trinity where we live. It would impact the children in the neighborhood to some degree. he mentioned that everything beyond there was commercial. That's not exactly correct. There's a school, Northfield School, as you move back toward Memorial, east, and then there are two homes, two nice homes that sit there before the commercial property begins. So it's not all commercial to the east of this piece of property. I would hate to keep anybody from selling their property, but at the same time, that piece of property sit there a long, long time, a very long time. And without a specific plan to develop, I think we would be foolish to go ahead and just jump out there and rezone this. I think we'd be better off to wait till we had an actual proposal from someone who was going to invest themselves in that property, and then feel at least an obligation to the neighborhood to keep that something that's viable for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eads. Anybody else? Close this public hearing. And Ms. Greene, any comments before we?
Yes, ma'am. What you have before you is a PCD, and as a PCD, it's basically a tailor-made zone for property, and you can be very specific about elements of it that you cannot with bulk zoning, and so that we, of course, recommended them to do this. We understood that there isn't a specific tenant, but as far as the staff is concerned, this is the best way to regulate future development because you have more control and say. As such, there are a list of uses that are proposed to be prohibited and some to be permitted. And certainly tonight, if the Planning Commission thinks of some uses or would like to take the recommendation of some of the nearby residents to add to the uses, that certainly can be a condition of your approval. And I'll just say the ones that I noted because I was trying to write as fast as I could, but I think they mentioned a gas station, car lots, car repair, convenience market, and packaged beer sales. Those were the uses that I heard. And if you think that that is a right decision, that's something that you can add to if you decided to move forward. And then there were some questions about the specifics regarding the buffer. What is proposed between this property and the property to the north is a PVC fence that's a minimum of 8 feet tall. And PVC holds up a little bit better than wood or other types of materials, so I recommended that. And that fence runs along the northern property line and the western property line, since those are contiguous residential uses. Then the landscaping that goes in there is a type D buffer landscaping, which is double rows of evergreen. And the buildings themselves are separated by 15 feet. Of course, you could recommend something different, but the separation is 15 feet. And I asked them to consider, our building codes department oftentimes requires a landing behind buildings that have multi-tenant. So if you see these multi-tenant buildings and you look behind them, you'll see a concrete landing. It's a required second place of egress. And so I wanted to make sure that if that was going to be there, that we would make note of it. The landscaping would be there, but if codes requires that concrete landing, that they could put it in there. And that's what that exception is talking about when they mention that. We have asked them to move the driveway as far north as possible, so it is close to the property line to the north, but that's because that is a signalized intersection, and we really have to get those driveways away from that signalized intersection. We're also requiring the developer of this property to dedicate or give the city right-of-way to create a right turn lane heading south off of Sulphur Springs Road, and so we need to have room for that right turn lane as well, and you can see an indication of it on the plans before you. So the distance, the land, the uses, the driveway, the dumpster, I mean, certainly you could have it be in another location. I think that where it is now is probably, in this situation, the best location for it because we certainly don't want it in the front and we don't want it right next to the rear property line. So this is between both buildings, reducing the number of dumpsters. We have in the past had restrictions on time, and they certainly can put a restriction on the time of delivery. I just like to caution Planning Commission, City Council that enforcement of that is a little difficult because if it's a condition in the zoning, would become a zoning violation, and you have staff members 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. So sometimes maybe we might like to get up and get to work at 3 or 4 in the morning, but there's not really anybody there to enforce it, so I don't want to give false impressions that it's something that could easily be enforced, because that's not something that the police department would do. It would actually be one of your planners that would go out there and need to witness the violation, take photographs, and those sorts of things. So you can have those time frames in there, and oftentimes people will self-regulate to them anyway. But I just want you to know the enforcement mechanism is the planning department, so, or development services, or however it may shake out. Let's see. This development could be developed in phases, 1 to 2 phases. I think that, or what's across the street is also being developed in phases, self-storage first and then commercial later, but you can require the buffer be installed with the first phase development, either entire buffer or portion of it, if that's something that you think is appropriate. And I know that was one of the comments that was brought up tonight, that the concern with the phasing. There is, of course, a blind spot on West Northfield Boulevard, and part of the plan is to shift the driveway connection onto West Northfield Boulevard further to the west to get a better sight distance. And that's something that Mr. Balachandra felt very strongly about when he was involved in the application across the street. And so there have been some changes to the to West Northfield Boulevard by the city, but with the self-storage being constructed to the south, there are going to be even more changes. They're going to make some improvements to the road, and you'll see those in the future. And this development, of course, would have to participate in improving as well. The Oak Haven, whether it's right-of-way or not right-of-way, we have taken some time to look at it. We've looked at the plat, which is an old plat. What you see is the tax map on our GIS. Those are actually the tax parcel lines, and they indicate that it is a right-of-way, but when we look on the plat, it's not quite clear. It just seems like an excessively large sanitary sewer easement. In any case, this zoning change will have no effect on the status of that, whether it's an easement or a future right-of-way. I don't know that the city has any interest in making that connection. I think we have more higher priority roads that we want to build, and I'm actually not convinced that it actually is a public right-of-way either, but they don't have a bearing on each other. This property has no access to that, and we would not require this developer to construct that, because I'm not even sure it's something the city wants. So while its status is still a little bit unclear, it's certainly not affected by this application. Is there something that I may have missed that you want me to touch?
No, but I wanted to ask one question about when we were talking about if it was developed in phases, and we were talking about requiring the buffering on the entire parcel, possibly, if it did develop in just one phase at a time. Would it just automatically, would all of the paving and the parking all be there, and maybe just not the other building be developed? I mean, because I do think, and someone mentioned the access, having both accesses. I mean, can we require that part without, and require that along with the buffering, require both accesses be available if one parcel develops without the other?
Sure, that's certainly, I think that was a requirement as well across the street. They have 2 points as well, and that can be something that you require. Generally, they would want to do as little as possible, but certainly we can go ahead and require that at the beginning.
And the only other thing I kind of wondered, and I don't know, it might be a good thing, since we don't have the, the permitted uses from the storage here in front of us. I don't know that we can just say we want those exact same ones, even though that might be a great thing. But I just wondered, the ones that stuck out to me were the veterinary-related ones that were under the permitted uses. And I don't know enough about what, the requirements are for what is the difference between a veterinary clinic versus a veterinary office versus a pet shop. And all I would really be concerned about was whichever one of those allows them, to keep the animals overnight, and they, may or may not be outside. And I live pretty close to a veterinary clinic, and it can be kind of loud sometimes at night. So maybe that might be something to consider. Might not want to have in there, since it backs up so close to, particularly that one parcel, Mr. Sullivan's.
You've had a similar condition on a planned development on Medical Center Parkway with doggies daycare. They don't have a kennel, basically, so they can have pets during the day, but overnight pets are sometimes what becomes a nuisance. And generally, the difference in the office and the clinic is the size of the animal.
Oh, okay.
There's a third veterinarian type. Do you remember what it is?
Veterinary hospital.
Veterinary hospital, and that one definitely allows a kennel.
Okay.
So if that was a concern, you could ask for them to include in the prohibited uses a kennel as a primary and secondary use.
So what happens, I mean, because you can't list every single thing in the whole, like, to the things that aren't in here, you just, if they wanted one of those uses, they'd just have to come back for an amendment, correct?
So if it's close to something listed, the planning director, it's their responsibility to make that interpretation citywide. But if it is something that's just really different and we're not comfortable with, we would have to amend the plan development book and come back to you. But if it's, a different type of restaurant or something, we would have to interpret it.
I know, I definitely agree with the comments regarding the gas stations or convenience stores, car lots, car repairs, et cetera, those items to be added on the prohibited side. It's just my comment.
So,
What else?
Margaret, and back to Ms. Jones' question. So if it is not listed as a permitted use, but not listed as a prohibited use, it's like reading an insurance policy.
Yep.
So are we saying that, I would think that these are the permitted uses in a auto car sales, a convenience store, a package store, the things that are not on this permitted use?
So that is how we typically would interpret it, say it's not permitted because it's not in the permitted use list. We started developing a prohibited use list with plan development a few years ago because although it wasn't permitted, people wanted to feel more comfortable about it, so they wanted you to add a prohibited use. In our zoning ordinance, the way we operate with bulk zone is we have like 5 pages of permitted uses, and we have to daily make interpretations about where that fits in the parameter. But with plan development, whether it's the public or planning commissioners or city council, they felt more comfortable adding this type of list that's prohibited, just to make it clear so that there were no questions, or if you were concerned about interpretation in the future, you wanted to be clear at the beginning. We don't have like prohibited uses. In the gateway, we have prohibited uses, but outside the gateway and historic district, we don't have that in our zoning ordinance. It's just a matter of adding an extra layer of clarity and being comfortable with the uses. So they're not allowed. I would say a car lot would not be allowed because it's not on this list. But these go down in theoretically perpetuity, and although people change, so
I guess my only comment would be is with this application and any other application, that hopefully the applicant in and of itself, even though it wasn't listed as a prohibited use, that they would think that they would be allowed to do it. But anyway, that's just my comment.
And sometimes people get desperate to sell, and I mean, you can look around town and see property that's zoned single family right now that says it's commercial.
Yeah.
So, I mean, advertising is something different than the reality.
Can I add just a quick remark? And it's something I remember discussing with Clyde way back when on a previous review of this. I think the list that he uses the CF allowed uses, and I think that's where he derives for this. I think that's where he derived his use. So, look, car lot, for example, is not allowed in a CF district, and so I think that's why it's not appearing on here on either column. And I want to say, back on page 8 of his pattern book, he indicates that this is a CF comparison, and so I think that's where his list of uses comes from. And so I think that's why some of those that you're asking about simply aren't on one or the other. And he may want to clarify that just on that use page, that he's using CF as sort of his base for uses. Or he'll come tell me that I'm wrong.
Mr. Roundtree.
Donald is absolutely right. That's typically what we do if we have to go through permitted uses. We look through a comparable zoning and work through that list and try to make it as flexible as possible to maximize the opportunity. But that's exactly right. That's what I did. And So if it's a permitted use, it's on the left side. If it's a prohibited use, on the right-hand side. I did talk to the owners, and like we said, it's not permitted in CF, so gas stations or the car repair is not really an issue. There's no liquor sales. They have no interest, so we have no issue adding the packaged beer sales. The only one that they've actually had people show interest as far as the neighbors was a convenience store. Even though it wasn't a gas station, it's a place where you can get milk, get something convenient. So that was the only one that kind of came up as a question. We would love to keep that use in there as a permitted use, but right now it's not even a permitted use. It's just what they've had people show interest in that particular application of the property.
Okay, any other comments, questions?
I don't want to draw it out, but just to use that as an example, if they came back and said they're going to do a convenience store only, where in the process would somebody stop and say, okay, where does that fall, and does it require any additional discrepancy?
Generally, when somebody wants to put a contract on property, they have a due diligence process. And during the due diligence process, they have their financer, they have their design team, they have their people in their company, and then the permit clerks that they've hired all call us separately, and I'll ask the same question, I suppose, hoping they get a different answer, but they don't, and inquire if it's use permitted. If it gets beyond that, which it shouldn't, they would have to meet with, this is my area, so meet with me prior to submitting a site plan, and I would look at it and say, well, that use is not permitted, you can't submit. If they submitted a site plan, we would reject it within 24 hours, saying that it is incomplete because they're submitting a site plan for a use that's not permitted, and it would not get past there. Although normally it stops at the very beginning.
So convenience store would not be permitted?
Not if it's under 5,000 square feet. Do you remember if they're allowed in CF? Because Donald is mentioning CF.
I can find out.
Okay.
I could see where gas station doesn't come even close to any one of these, and it seems a little bit more clear. I think this is an educational session for all of us, but convenience center may be a little bit more difficult to decipher. For me, it would.
The CF zone, I'm fairly certain, allows gas stations. It just has restrictions on the location of the pumps. So what, Mr. Anthony, I'm not sure.
Convenience sales and service of less than 5,000 square feet is permitted by right in the CF zone. And that's not necessarily with gas pumps. That would just be a convenience store by itself. And then gas station would be a separate use, and gas stations are also permitted in the CF zone.
If I recall correctly,
on distance from residential, right? The gas pumps have to be
The pumps,
Yeah.
or speaker boxes.
But if I recall correctly, the property across the street from it, across Northville from it, does have the convenience store option, but no pumps, so no gas pumps. So would there be a problem with just adding gas sales and car lot or car sales? Would there be a problem with adding that to the prohibited uses? Bins, this is kind of that's kind of the one that the neighbors are most concerned about. Would there be a problem with adding that?
Based on the discussion from Planning Commission, I think it would be appropriate.
And Mr. Roundtree, would you be okay with that?
Be fine.
And so
we're
what I
saying
had was
no-
gas stations, car lots, car repair, and packaged beer. Is that right?
I question packaged beer because you got Walgreens and so many places like that that do sell packaged beer that's not primarily their business.
So that would not be a packaged beer. That would be either a convenience store or pharmacy, and that's an accessory use. Packaged beer is, and we don't see them as often now that the liquor laws have changed, but it's those stores that sold just beer and tobacco, basically, or just beer.
Right.
There's some that are on Rutherford and closer to the university, but
discount
Walgreens does
tobacco
not fit that
type places,
category.
right, yeah.
Kroger doesn't fit that category. Target.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I got a problem. We've got permitted use. Nowhere does it say in this application, all permitted uses associated with commercial fringe. It says, here's the permitted use list. So why are we now saying that it's permitted uses based upon commercial fringe?
I think that the permitted uses listed are the permitted uses. He just used, his master list came from CF, and then he reduced it down from the master list. So the permitted uses are just those listed.
So he eliminated some that were commercial fringe uses.
Yes, some of the commercial fringe were eliminated, and that's how he came up with that list.
I was hearing that okay.
I think the idea was just that that's what they based it on, because there are some additional uses listed in commercial highway that weren't considered because they weren't allowed in CF. So he started with the Excel spreadsheet we have for CF and then shrunk it.
And Mr. Halliburton, I think the bottom line is the uses that are listed under permitted uses, if this is approved, are the uses that would be permitted. Any other uses notwithstanding, I mean, that would be the operative list.
I like the way you worded it.
Okay, so I understand we're going to add convenience stores to the permitted list, and we're going to take gas stations, beer packing sales, car repair,
So
and cars
convenience store, 'cause it's
car
not on it.
sales onto the prohibited list. Gas stations, beer package, car repair, card sales will be on the prohibited list.
Well, I think you were taking off the beer, weren't you? I mean, you were leaving it on permitted.
I think there are some uses that could use the property that could probably have beer sales on it that would be not objectionable.
I'm back with you.
If, if it were a Walgreens type situation, I would think that would be acceptable as long as their primary sales is not a beer sales.
Not the beer and tobacco.
Right.
They're prohibited.
To answer Mr. Eakes, who just happened to be one of the finest football officials to ever officiate referee a game in Murfreesboro, the right-of-way that exists extends from Oak Haven Drive over to Sulphur Springs Road, not Northfield. So it curves and it goes between Mr. Sutherland's house and Bill Jones's house. And in fact, the driveway that they share between their properties is that right-of-way. And so that road currently exists in a very small section, and they use it as their driveway, and they maintain it. So I think they deserve to use it as their driveways. But there's no intentions whatsoever, and we've discussed this in the past, of extending that because it doesn't benefit the neighborhood. It would probably only create unwanted traffic in your area, and I can't imagine why anybody would want to connect that road over into your neighborhood from Sulphur Springs, because it's not difficult to get to your neighborhood from that area. So I don't think you need to worry about that. The concern about the Northfield Boulevard, personally, I don't have a problem with traffic turning left off of Northfield going into this property because there's a light there that will stop the traffic at Northfield and Sulphur Springs, and I don't think that there would ever be a problem there with having the road blocked in order to get across. I do foresee a huge problem with traffic wanting to come left out of that property there. So I would suggest that any design of a point would be right in, right out only, or right in, right out, and left in only, but no left out of that property onto Northfield, because the rise of Northfield just to the, I guess that's the north of this, would be just impossible to see from this property leaving it what's coming up Northfield and coming down that rise, coming down towards the Sulphur Springs Road. So I would request that be added to the booklet to protect the neighbors. The drainage, the property can't allow any more drainage from the property than it currently has. So in most cases, this development should only improve that because it would have at some point a designed detention pond or retention pond. I'm glad Mr. Roundtree's been nodding his head on everything that I've said so far, but I hope he continues doing that. I think that whoever develops this property should be accountable for developing that right-hand turn lane on Sulphur Springs as well. I know you're committed to giving the right-of-way and the easement, but if you're going to develop this property, the only substantial reason for needing that right-hand lane, although I think it would be beneficial if it were there today, but it would be to reduce the length of the stacking lane so that this roadway would be the stacking would be shortened, therefore it would be possible to turn off Sulphur Springs into the property. And so I would feel that if you're going to give the easement for it, that you should be held responsible as well for the development of that curb and gutter and road surface or whatever it takes to build that right-hand turning lane.
Thank you, Mr. Smotherman. Any other comments or questions?
Just a general comment. It's not specifically to this site, but Councilman Smother and I today had our workshop meeting, and we talked about CIP, and there were a lot of road projects associated with that. And Sulphur Springs Phase 3 is, I think, is scheduled for 2020 and 21, and while none of that's been approved yet, just kind of for the good of the order, that was in the CIP that we looked at today. So.
Okay, any other comments or ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to any staff comments. And did we decide on whoever developed the property first would be the one that developed all the buffer and the fencing as well? And that as well.
And the access, both accesses.
Both accesses and the right-of-ways, Mr. Smotherman mentioned.
Can I get the prohibited uses that you agreed on? Were you including kennel, and then did you decide to, just to make note of them, since you're making the motion?
I believe it was convenience store, no gas station,
No gas, okay.
no package, alcohol.
No package.
No, were the
That's
other,
correct.
what were the other two?
Package is permitted.
Package permitted, and
Car lots and
car lots.
Car
Car
repair.
repair.
And car lots. No car lots, no car repairs. Kennel?
It's already on here, isn't it?
Well, kennel, if that's different from.
For overnight
and
stays for animals?
Nobody else may have a problem with that, so.
Okay.
Speaking from personal
Okay.
experience.
The clinic has an accessory use that's overnight boarding. So overnight boarding is,
They're sick. You're not out running around.
No, they're on vacation.
But none of these buildings on this plan have a designed outside park area or a fenced-in area or anything like that. I think if you went to that level of changing the plan, that you would have an outside storage area for pets or animals, that would be something that would be required to either get the director's approval or come back before us as a considerable change, which would probably be turned down.
Also, are we including Mr. Smotherman's comment about the applicant developing the right turn lane? I mean, I think it's going to need to be part of the motion if that's what we're going to ask them to do.
I don't know if you heard it, I actually included that in
Oh,
my,
you did.
in my motion.
And the reason I do think that we should require that is the property directly across the street from it on the north field that we've referred to two or three times, whether we have the 3 lots, they are required to develop the improvements to Sulphur Springs Road if they develop that project. So I think it's, if we're doing it for one, we need to do it for the other.
Sorry about that, check.
Thank you for checking, Ken.
So do we have a motion now?
Is it all in? You need me to read it, say it again?
I've got a bunch. Carolyn, do you want to go through what the?
We'll go together.
Okay.
All staff comments, buffer, fencing, right of way, gas package. No.
I think they took package out. They initially said that they wanted it.
Take out the package. Gas stations. Car repair, car lots, overnight boarding, kennel board.
Take that out.
You took that out. Also, right-of-way improvements, right turn lane along Sulphur Spring Road. Any additions? Fantastic.
And the access point at Northfield would be right in, left in, and right out only.
Yes. I thought that was already kind of mentioned in here on the traffic plan, so that's why I guess I didn't include that.
All right.
But happy to include
Double
it.
covering all our bases.
And to clarify, we're saying the applicant will have to make the right turn lane improvement, not the developer.
It's the developer, whoever developed it, yeah, it
Not
goes
the
with development,
Okay.
yeah. When this is developed, it'll have to be
Gotcha.
in with the first phase.
Thank you.
It's really not.
And I do think this is a very good project because, as I've said before, this is not a location where you would build your dream home. It's just too much traffic, there's too much noise there from the intersection. And so I think it's probably closer to the appropriate use of the property. I do think that, you know, from the neighborhood meeting up to this point, we've definitely seen improvements thanks to Ted and the other people who were involved in this process. I think Ted got most of what he asked for. And so I'm pleased with how the process worked on this. I think it was a very challenging one for us to look at and say this is the right thing to do because it's so conceptual as far as to what we're doing. But I hope that somebody does come in and purchase the property and develop it because the property has struggled in the past several years as far as maintenance and upkeep, and it would be nice to see the corner come back to life and have some function.
So is that a second?
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you, everyone, very much. Our next item is an annexation petition and plan of services for approximately 11 acres located along Florence Road, Saraswat Family Trust applicants. And Ms. Greene.
Thank you. This next item is for an annexation request that we've received for property owned by the Saraswat Family Trust. They were required to prepare and submit a petition for annexation. The property is located along the western side of western side of Florence Road, just across the right-of-way of the interchange for I-24 and I-840. It's located just south of under development residential subdivision called Shelton Square. Shelton Square will also be located to the west as well. The property itself is just over 11 acres. Also included in the study is additional Florence Road right-of-way. So in total, 2,300 linear feet of Florence Road right-of-way with two sections, and those sections are identified in orange. There's a 1,600 linear foot section adjacent to the property, and to the north is a 700 linear foot section. And this would put all of Florence Road from 840 to the north, a section within the city's jurisdiction, so that it would be the city's responsibility to maintain. We did take this request to TDOT and the County Road Board, both of which were not opposed to the annexation of the property and the city becoming responsible for its maintenance. There is a companion zoning change request, which will be the subject of the next public hearing, not this public hearing. This public hearing is to consider the annexation of the property in the right-of-way. I've prepared a feasibility study and plan of services that outlines the services the city can provide and identifies a time frame for which we can provide them. Most services are available to the property as it currently exists, and as it develops, it will be the responsibility of the developer to extend services into the property. Sewer is currently not, per the definition of the Water Resource Department, available because it doesn't touch the property, but this parcel has, or this property has acquired a parcel in the subdivision to the north which has sewer available and can bring it down to the property. So I've given you the plan of services. As I mentioned, this public hearing is for the annexation and not the zoning change request. So we'd ask anybody who speaks at the public hearing to speak regarding the annexation. We will have a second public hearing immediately after this one to consider the zoning change request. The applicant and his representative are here if you have any questions regarding the annexation from them. Without anything else, I recommend you have your public hearing.
Okay, any questions for the public hearing. Any comments? So I'll open the public hearing, and you can come forward and give us your comments. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. My name's Gloria Shelton. I live at 2001 Florence Road. Mine is directly on the annexation, and I really kind of feel like the public hearing and the information that's provided in y'all's documentation has been a little bit misleading. When you look at your actual agenda, it says nothing about the additional right-of-way that y'all are wanting to annex. Not only does the annexation of the right-of-way, and that is what I'm talking about, goes on one side of the property, and then the 16 linear feet or whatever that goes all the way up to the other side. It's only listed as one bullet point. When you actually go into the meat of the agenda item, you talk about signage. The only signage that was put on Florence Road was only directly in front of where the subdivision was. Nothing on any of the areas that dealt with the actual right-of-way had any type of signage that even showed that that was being addressed. And to make it even more, when you look at your very agenda items, the right-of-way is not even listed here. The additional right-of-way that y'all are asking for really does not hinder the subdivision and condos or whatever they're planning on building. It doesn't really deter them from being able to do that. So I really kind of feel like there's been a little bit of deception on what's being provided to the people and what your actual document shows when you just look at the agenda. For anybody that's in here, unless they go in there and pull it or got the notice, even realize that there was two parts to this. And, you know, that's kind of my take on how this came across. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Not close that public hearing. And Ms. Greene, can you address that?
Yeah, there was no deception with the right-of-way, and as a matter of fact, I spoke to Ms. Shelton, and she was concerned about the annexation of the right-of-way and opposes it, and I understand that, and expressed to her that it is staff's recommendation that you do annex that right-of-way, that it does not annex her property because she hasn't submitted a petition for annexation, so we wouldn't be annexing her property. And so I'm not sure why I mean, there's no deception here. It's clear, and it's clearly identified by maps and in the planning services in the staff report. So I understand not being for it, but it is something that staff recommends you do.
So is the right-of-way we're referring to, is that the little strip that runs over to Pointer Place?
I don't know why our monitors aren't working. If the cable department can get them to turn them on.
It's just this one.
Is it just this one? Okay. If there's a map, and there are two orange linear shapes, and those are both segments of right-of-way. And those are the segments of right-of-way that we're considering. Yeah, and that map was the legal notice included those as well. Of course, the Planning Services has it in there. My staff report has it in there. It's been clear that that's something that we're looking to do. We went to TDOT with it. We went to the road board, which are all public meetings, to discuss it.
I'm good, Steve.
But what the right-of-way, the reason we would want that is because we would like for that roadway to be held up to city standards rather than.
And also, so you don't have these small little segments that Greg Brooks is responsible for maintaining this little portion, although there's a lot of city development along it. And so that it's clear whose jurisdiction it is. If there was an accident here, the city responds to it. And then also, we maintain the road as well.
Right, and that's part of the challenge when we have what I refer to as checkerboard annexation, if you don't annex the entire roadway, then you wind up with an accident on the road, and the question is who is supposed to respond, or who. So just for the ability to provide services, it does make more sense to go ahead, even though the property adjacent to the roadway may not be in the city, and nor will it ever be in the city if it doesn't want to be, because there will be no forced annexation on that property prohibited by state law. I mean, I don't see any reason in the world that it shouldn't be right away. And as far as deception, the picture that's being shown on our screen here right now clearly shows that that roadway is part of the annexation. If there's no other questions or comments, I move for approval.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, could I ask one question?
Sure.
Before we do that, or do we have to vote? We had talked about the retention detention ponds and the landscaping around this. Did we ever resolve that with the developer?
Yeah, and that'll be a part of the next public hearing with the plan development program.
Okay. That's right. I'll wait. Nope, we'll wait. Yep, sorry.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that item carries. The next item is the companion zoning application for approximately 11 acres located along Florence Road and Pointer Place to be zoned PRD, Shelton Crossing PRD, simultaneous with annexation. Alcorn Properties LLC is the applicant. Ms. Greene's going to go over this, and I just want to mention before we start this public hearing that I will conduct the hearing, but I will be abstaining from this. Mr. Alcorn and I are both affiliated with Parks Realty, and so I will abstain from this item, from discussion and a vote on this zoning application. So, Ms. Greene.
Thank you. This item under our new business is the last one that I'll present to you. You're probably happy about that. But it's for the companion zoning change request for the annexation you just considered, which is property that's just over 11 acres, as I mentioned. The property is proposed to be developed with single-family attached units. Again, that's a way that we say townhomes. And it's currently zoned RM, which is medium-density residential in the county. Property to the north and to the west are zoned PRD, Planned Residential District, and our developing city subdivision, and to the south properties in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. Across Florence Road is actually all interstate right-of-way. There's no property owner across the street other than the state. The Shelton Crossing PRD does have a program book, which we've laid out before you and included in your packet. And it outlines a specific plan to allow 88 townhomes on the 11 acres for a density of just under 8 dwelling units an acre. The future land use map does recommend that this develop with a density that is equivalent to that, so it is consistent with the future land use map. The structures are proposed to have a minimum of 1,400 heated square feet with just a one-car garage, and the streets located within this development are proposed to be private streets. We have insisted upon their connection to the adjacent public right-of-way to the north, which is Pointer Place, and that is also where the sewer should be coming down. They have asked for some exceptions to our zoning ordinance, which are permitted through the land development process. One is to reduce the front setback from 35 feet to 25 feet, to reduce the side setback, to increase the side setback, I guess, it's 5, and they're saying 10, and then the rear is saying the same. You mentioned that we discussed the retention or detention pond, whatever ends up being on this property, the one to the north, or not to the north, to the east, along the frontage of Florence Road. They're committing to landscaping it per our standards along Florence Road, but have asked for a specific exception to the requirement that we have to screen it on all the sides internally, and at the workshop, Planning Commission seemed to be okay with that exception, so planning staff did not insist on them removing it. So there is still the exception in the program book to not add that screening around the detention or retention pond, whatever they end up being. They did relocate the animal park. I think they didn't want me to discriminate and call it a dog park, but an animal park, so now it's near the detention pond and away from the adjacent single-family residential uses. Mr. Matt Taylor is representing the applicant, who they're both here this evening. If you have any questions for them, he did prepare a PowerPoint presentation, would like to present that to you. After his presentation, you should hold a public hearing prior to making any recommendations.
Hey, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Greene. Good evening, Chairwoman Jones and the rest of the Planning Commission. I appreciate you having us here tonight. And I am Matt Taylor from SEC here in town, and I'm accompanied by Mr. Alcorn, the applicant on the project. And we do have a brief presentation to cover our project we've termed Shelton Crossing. As Ms. Greene indicated, it's about an 11-acre parcel located along the west side of Florence Road. It's currently open pasture land. I think it's mainly mowed for hay. I don't believe there's any livestock on the property currently. And it's fenced off from the surrounding properties. In general, the property falls both to the east and to the west, so some of it drains toward Florence, and then some of it drains toward the Shelton Square development that's under development currently. We do have county developments or property to the south, and then undeveloped right-of-way interchange to the east, and then to the west and north we have the Shelton Square PRD. I don't know if Ms. Greene touched on it, but this is one application that does follow the comprehensive plan's recommendations, both in land use as well as density. So we're excited about that. Here's a picture from Florence Road. The property would be to the left of this picture. This is looking north. You can actually see the entrance and a sign there for Shelton Square in the distance. This is looking from Florence due west directly into the property. And then this is looking from Florence due west to the single-family residence directly to the south of the property. The plan, as Ms. Greene said, is proposed as a PRD or planned residential district. That would allow for 88 townhouses, which produces a density of about 8 units to the acre on our 11 acres. We've committed to all of our utilities being underground. Any of the common space, which would be everything outside the 4 walls, would be managed and maintained by an HOA. That HOA would be mandatory for each of our owners and would be managed by a third-party association. We've tried to spread our open space as well as visitor parking between the front, middle, and rear of the property. Each of these units will be for sale under a horizontal property regime or an HPR, so everything outside the 4 walls will be maintained by that HOA. We've got sidewalks along both sides of all of our streets, and those sidewalks extend to Florence as well as Pointer Place to connect into the neighboring communities. We do have type D buffers located along the north, south, and west sides of this project that will be installed. We have planned for a trash compactor, which will be picked up by a private hauler and maintained by the HOA. And then our streets, because we are an HPR, will be private streets that will be maintained by the HOA as well. The homes themselves will all be 2 stories. They'll all have 1-car garages. They'll start at 1,400 square feet in size and go up to over 1,700 square feet. And here's some example elevations. You can see it's all brick, stone, fiber cement. There's a lot of undulations and varying roof planes and front building facades. So it creates a very attractive facade as you drive down the street. The way that we alternate the garages creates a lot of green space along the street as well, so it helps break that up. That undulations along the rear, you'll see that all these units will get a fenced-in rear patio. Just kind of a perspective view to show you those varying planes. The amenities, every community likes to have some identity, so we'll start that off with a sign off of Florence, which we see as being our primary entrance. And then as you come in on the left will be a pet or animal park, and that is away from any of the existing or proposed homes, so it's not directly against somebody's house. And then in the center of the property is our largest and most focused amenity, which will consist of a playground. Our kiosk will be there, so it attracts daily activity from the residents here. And then we've got a very formal lawn space that can be used for any number of unstructured activities such as frisbee, wiffle ball, picnics, or just to enjoy a little time outside. And again, because this is such a condensed community and the sidewalks that we've provided, we think that all of these will be widely used by our residents on a daily basis or weekly. Access, we do have two primary points of access. The main one will be off Florence Road. At this location, we'll also have to build turn lanes, just like Shelton Square. And then we've also got a immediate connection point to Pointer Place that will be installed with phase 1. So we'll have 2 points of ingress and egress. And then we've planned for a future stub to the south. If that property ever develops, they would have a connectivity point to our development. And then again, all of our streets will be private. So I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing, if you have any.
Any questions for Mr. Taylor?
Matt, could you get into a little bit more detail about the request for the variance and the setback?
So really the setbacks are to let us pull the units a little closer to the private streets. And then I think we're actually showing that we're increasing the side setback, if I remember right. So that part's probably not really a variance, except for we're enforcing an additional setback on ourselves on that part.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. We'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item. Okay. Close the public hearing. Just ask for any further questions or comments.
If there are none, I'll make a motion that we approve, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? And one abstention, please. Okay. Thank you. Our next item is a zoning application for approximately 1.2 acres located along Bridge Avenue and Power Avenue to be rezoned from RM12 to PRD, Bridge Avenue Villages PRD. Mustafa Shaban, applicant. Ms. Tomlin.
Thank you. This is an application on the corner of Bridge and Power Avenue. It is 1.2 acres and is currently zoned RM12. The applicant is requesting to build 16 single-family townhomes. 8 will be 2-bedroom and 8 3-bedroom. The applicant is asking for an additional 2 units over what the base zoning would allow, but the primary purpose of this PRD zoning is to request for the developer to be able to work around a large utility easement that runs through the center of this property. The setbacks requested in the PRD zoning will allow the developer to move the homes forward and stay out of that easement. The plan calls for 2 formal open space areas, and the homes proposed will be 100% masonry with front elevations of varying styles that include brick and cement fiberboard. Properties to the north and west of this development are zoned RM12, east is RS8, and south is the heavy industrial. There is a utility substation that sits directly across from the property. The Murfreesboro 2035 recommends a land use character of suburban residential for the area. This character is generally associated with the lower density areas on the periphery of the city. Recommended development types are detached residential dwellings and planned developments that provide other housing. PRD is consistent with the other housing, but it is inconsistent with the recommended low density. This request is for a density of 13.3 dwelling units per acre. However, while this property is designated suburban residential, it is located within close proximity to downtown, and it's also in close proximity to an industrialized area. There's high-density development within the vicinity, and the existing zoning is a higher density than what is recommended by the 2035 plan. This development could be a stabilizing force for the existing residential development in the area. The Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing, discuss the matter, and form a recommendation for the City Council. The applicant and his representative are here, and they have a brief presentation, and I'm sure they'll answer any questions you might have. If you have any questions for me, let me know.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tomlin. Mr. Roundtree?
Oh, wow, let's see where we're at. I might need an expert here, let's see. Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Chairman Jones, Commissioners, staff, my name is Clyde Rounder, Hiddleston Steel Engineering. Thank you again for the opportunity to present Bridge Avenue Village. Thank you, Diana, for all your hard work. This has been an exciting project to be a part of. Mr. Shaban, this is the first project for him as far as development. He's owned this property for many, many years, and he has a house right now that's a rental house on the property. So this is an embarking upon an opportunity for him, a very sharp individual, and interested to join the development community. So it's been a privilege to work with him as well. So I am representing Mr. Shaban, and this piece of property, as Diana mentioned, is located in an area that's basically within a mile of downtown. So it's an area that's seen some changes. A lot of the public housing that was associated with that corner, a little bit past this development, has been taken down. The fire station's come in, the training center. As Diana mentioned, there's a substation across the street, and we have some major power lines going through the property that have posed, a little bit of a challenge for us from a development standpoint, but it's created some opportunity for us as well. It's been mentioned that we're looking for a reduced front setback, but before I get ahead of myself, let me go through some brief pieces. Diana mentioned a lot about the adjacent zoning, and you can see that heavy industrial area across from our development. That is the substation itself, and it is our RM12 currently, which is a pretty high density zoning as it exists now. Okay, so the aerial footage just basically shows you that because of the power lines, it reads as green space, and that continues on past our property, and it goes into a neighborhood park that's, you can basically see it in this picture towards the top portion of the property. It perceives itself as a higher density area currently. The homes are modest homes, and there are apartments down the street off to the right within a quarter mile of this development. There's apartments on the bottom center picture that are right down the street around the corner. And then some typical housing, what they look like along the property. Most of them would be vinyl type of homes. So I think as far as our commitment from an architecture standpoint, I think we'll be being an asset to the neighborhood as far as architectural character and quality. There is a senior living center basically diagonal to the property, so that's basically adjacent to the property as well. Overall, the site plan has 16 units, basically 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom, eight 3-bedroom units, 8 2-bedroom units. We have the mail kiosk that's basically related to where the amenity center is. The amenity center is right in the center of the property, and it'll have a playground and some grilling stations. There's also a dog run area that's separate from the playground, and it's over by the dumpster area. One of the keys to this project that we felt we were excited about is, as mentioned, we're asking for a reduced front setback, but that's forcing us to kind of pull this product closer to the road. And we feel like that's going to give it a little different urban scale, but the big benefit of it as well is it's going to provide us some screening from the parking. So all the parking's central to the property, so the buildings will screen the parking lot from Powers and from Bridge. And then where there's a gap between the buildings, we've added a split rail fence that will landscape. So it's a pretty self-contained piece of property, and we're working with the CTAB program to try to make sure to really try to discourage any kind of migration across the site. So with that in mind, we have that fencing that would kind of connect the structures and kind of create a sensation of, I don't walk through this property, just on a bystander standpoint. As Diana mentioned, the architecture is, we're calling it more of a modern cottage look, where every unit will have some sort of a stoop type of landing or a front porch. And that covered porch, we would like to add some detail to that really gives it more of a quaint type of look. There'll be dormers on the roof lines, undulating roof lines. We know that, some shutters as well to try to really create a real cool character. Mr. Shaban really wants these to be kind of a benchmark type of product where the homes that come into the neighborhood past this point this will set the bar. Working with the staff, we did add some detail in the back and primarily added awnings over the back entry doors, so the back wouldn't be too monotonous on the rear. Color palette's kind of described up there, but that's probably subject to a little bit of change, but really it's going to be kind of a whitewash kind of look, like we said, that kind of modern cottage. We will be providing a buffer along the, I guess, the southern perimeter of the property, and that will continue to be residential properties. Currently they are, and they'll stay that way. We'll have foundation planting around the buildings. That's really to kind of create that cottage type of look. We're committed to making sure the landscaping is a step above what you'd expect from this kind of price point of home. As mentioned, the amenities are the playground area, the grill stations, the picnic. There will be some benches, as well as a dog run area. It's not a dog park by any means. It's not that large, but it is a place where people can walk their dog on the property. And we do see it happening in 2 phases. Mr. Shaban owns a piece of rental property currently where the red outline is. That will stay intact in phase 1 if possible. And we plan on building along Powers first at our initial phase. And so with that, I'm available for any questions you may have. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present Bridge Avenue Village.
Thank you, Mr. Roundtree. Any questions before we open the public hearing? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak either for or against this item. Okay. Close the public hearing. And comments or questions from the Planning Commission?
Mr. Roundtree, on multiple pages, I'll use 11 for the example. You have the fence extending across the sidewalk. I'm assuming that's a little bit inaccurate. Is that safe to say?
It's definitely safe to say. I'm trying to think if it might be a power line or some interpretation.
Yeah, I think it's your fence.
Yeah, I think that what that's representing is that line is related to the electrical easement that we're kind of still showing. We've kind of, because of the power lines, you basically have to be 20 feet off those power lines, and they're considered a center line. So we did show the line that's going right across the parking lot is really a part of that electrical easement.
Right. I see your power lines. I'm talking about the lines with the little X on it that are referred to as fence.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I think it's referred to as fence on page 9.
Page 9, it shows it going across. Yeah, it doesn't show it on mine.
Yeah, right into the sides, yeah, right there.
Oh, across the sidewalk. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, Eddie, that will be changed quickly.
Thanks,
Yeah.
sir. Also, there's a little concern right there in the southeastern corner where the fence forces anyone who's walking along that fence directly into the street. If you would, please stop that fence either 3 or 4 foot short of the fence or install the sidewalk to continue on around that corner. I don't really have a preference, but because it really doesn't lead to anything, I don't guess, except those 3 parking places. But don't run that fence up to the edge of the roadway as it's presented in these plans, because I think that's inappropriate to have a child running along that fence and decides he's going to run out there and somebody coming across that parking lot would,
I hear you.
It would be directly into their path with no warning whatsoever.
I got you.
Mr. Smotherman, are you talking about along the entrance going into off Power Avenue?
Power Avenue, the one that's to the south.
I think we would want that sidewalk to wrap around that entrance drive and connect to the internal sidewalk. I think that would be
I don't really care one way or the other. If you want it that way, that would be the better way to do it, probably. Okay. But we definitely don't want the fence going to the roadway.
Yes, sir. I think Clyde, I think you can revise that before council, can you?
We sure can. And so we're saying basically mirror what's going on right across the other drive lane.
On the north side.
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
So, Clyde, what's your thought process being that it sounds like phase two is gonna, the house is just gonna stay there, I guess, until he sells the, or has enough of these units sold to warrant the development of phase two, so, I guess it's gonna stay there, there's not gonna be any of the landscaping put in until phase two is developed. Is that the thought process?
It's definitely the thought process to try to keep it as a rental property as long as possible. As far as the timing of when that would be, decommissioned as a rental home, that's not determined currently. But I see what you're asking about as far as the buffer requirements along that edge and.
Yeah, because where is it gonna stop, where is it gonna end, as part of the initial development process?
Okay.
Kind of defeats the purpose of the fencing and the blocking off of the internal part of the property if you've got a house there with a gaping gap between it and where the fence begins.
Right, I mean, I think we just need some clarification and all come to an agreement.
Okay.
If we are gonna allow the two phasings, which, anyway.
I appreciate that.
Where are we gonna meet
How are we gonna
up?
make that work? I'll talk to Mr. Shaban about that, and we'll get clarification on that for sure.
It's almost how do you design the parking lot if you're only building half the project? Do you build the drive that goes across with the parking on the northeast side but not on the southwest side? I mean, it probably could use some clarification.
Okay.
Well, all of that shows in phase one. All the parking, the playground, all of that shows up in 13.
13.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The challenge is gonna be, you got the playground in, and you've got the old house there. They're gonna be right next to each other.
Mr. Russell, I would agree. It appears that basically all of the site work is proposed in phase one, except for the construction of the pads for the 8 units in phase two. And I think it would probably be difficult to get any landscaping in directly adjacent to those buildings because of the construction of those buildings. But it would appear that the buffering would be required basically to where that red line is. And it looks like the playground would also be, looks like they're also committing to the playground in phase one as well. So that's my interpretation of that phasing plan. And Mr. Roundtree can correct me if that's an incorrect interpretation.
And that's exactly right. The hope is just to keep the house activated as long as possible. As far as the amenity center was required to be in phase one, because that's a major component. Obviously, all the work that related to the parking lot would be in phase one. It just gave Mr. Shaban some options to just keep the house active as long as possible within reasonability of the construction of every other element of, on the lot. But Steve, you're open to whatever it takes to get that done. So if it's not a possibility from a logistics standpoint, we'd be willing to pull that phase out and just make it one phase. It's just a matter of trying to keep that home activated as long as possible.
Can you build the playground with the house still there? I mean, I'm trying to overlay.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, it looks to me like the playground extends into where the house is located.
I think that I have some concerns about that myself, and
Hey, we're fine. We'll just go ahead and pull the phasing out, and we'll just do it all in one phase, so we don't run into a logistical issue.
It's even better.
Can I bring clarification on that, though? If it's all phase one, is it upon a permit being pulled or site work being constructed that the house has to be taken down, or is there any grace period between his having to get the house removed and renters relocated and executing construction?
Mr. Roundtree, I think in general the demolition plan would need to be a part of the construction plans for the development. Certainly, there's a time frame with getting plans approved by the Planning Commission and then construction plans approved by staff, in which you could build in, time to relocate those renters during that time.
Okay. Well, we'll alter the book to having one phase.
If there are no more questions, I move to approve, subject to all staff comments, moving the phasing and making the adjustments to the fence and the sidewalk extension.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Our next item will be a zoning application for approximately 0.4 acres located along North Maple Street and West Slokey Avenue to be rezoned from RD to PRD, Maple Key Townhomes PRD, and Buford Powell is the applicant. Ms. Tomlin.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. This is an application for a PRD along North Maple Street. It is approximately 0.4 acres and is currently zoned RD. The applicant is requesting to build 4 single-family attached homes contained in 2 buildings, each building containing 2 units. The applicant is asking for setbacks that would create a more traditional walkable setting than the current base zoning would allow. This is not an increase in density. The PRD is being sought to allow flexibility in design. Exteriors of the building will be brick and fiber cement siding. Parking is located in the rear. There is formal open space, and septic properties have been applied as much as possible. Properties to the north, south, and east are also zoned RD, and property to the west is zoned RM16. The Murfreesboro 2035 plan recommends the land use character of general residential. This area includes both detached and detached housing types at a density of 3.5 to 8.6 dwelling units per acre. The PRD request is generally consistent with the general residential land use character, but it does exceed that recommended density. The requested density is 9.75. At the workshop, you requested that they offset these units to show dimension between the two. They have submitted elevations that you'll see in the pattern book that show that. However, the site plan doesn't show that offset, and that is something Clyde's going to correct prior to moving on. Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing and then formulate a recommendation for City Council. And again, Clyde is our applicant, and he's the representative for our applicant, and he has a presentation, and we'll answer any questions you have.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Tomlin.
Clyde Roundtree, Huddleston Engineering. Thank you for the opportunity to present Maple Key Townhomes. This is another project that we worked with Diane on, and a pretty exciting project. It had a lot to do with kind of where some of the direction of downtown's going with the CCO. This, I think, will be falling into that area in the future once the CCO gets approved. I am representing Mr. Buford Powell, who owns this property. Since owning the property, has taken down 2 homes that were kind of in a dilapidated state, and he's looking forward to building some newer townhomes on this particular piece of property. Right now, as Diana mentioned, it's surrounded by RD zoning, kind of close to the downtown area, and RM16 across the street. Right now, it's a green space with older homes and adjacent relationships. There is an alley behind the property that's come under some consideration of possibly being abandoned, but right now we're not pursuing that unless that's been pursued with city staff with Buford, but I don't have any knowledge of that. The adjacent relationships, really, it's more of the homes we're talking about, this with the group that talked about the CCO, a lot of your older, kind of smaller cottage homes, ranch homes, some in great shape, some in kind of tough shape, and a lot being remodeled and a lot of infill happening. I think this would fall under the infill category. And currently, as Diana mentioned, there's 4 units, minimum square footage, 1,500 square foot minimums. And we are looking for, we've got parking, adequate green space, an amenity area, so we feel like it's a good fit for the corner. The only thing we did as far as architecturally, which I'm pretty excited about, but it kind of took it to another level, You know, whenever we face a public right-of-way with the side of a building, you know, typically we want to make that building look like a front. Mr. Powell took that literally, so we were able to modify the floor plan to allow one of the facades to really address West Loki Avenue. So you can see on the plan, there's actually a sidewalk coming to the building from West Loki. So that adds a lot of detail. I'm really excited about these facades. We've done a lot of work on them. When we had our workshop meeting related to the architecture, one of the critiques was it looked very patchwork because we had a lot of different colors on the units. And we've toned that down, so we feel good about that. We've also added a stoop over one of the center windows that allowed it to look like another entry point, and we added the shutters, so it has a lot of detail. Something I think we can anticipate with the homes coming downtown is the idea of rooftop living, so this has that upper level patio area. This particular unit also has a second floor patio area, so there's a lot of outdoor living, but it's just not on the ground. We do have a formal open space between the buildings that we can utilize, but I think what we're going to find downtown is a lot of people are going to look into some sort of a rooftop patio type of scenario. So excited about the architecture. I did talk to Buford this morning, and he's more than willing to do the offset on the architecture. I was concerned that that would be an additional cost that he wasn't, you know, wanting to absorb, but he had no issue at all while letting that footprint kind of justify and jog a little bit. As far as landscape is concerned, foundation planting, perimeter planting, we were asked to add planting along the rear of the parking lot, though it's not required, but that was really to kind of make sure that there's no strobing of lights going into the adjacent neighbor's house. So we have shrubbery along the back portion of the parking lot. And as I mentioned, between the units is a formal open space area. And on the back portion, there's a picnic table as well for formal open space. As far as phasing is concerned, he'd like to do it in 2 phases. It doesn't fit the same criteria. Obviously, the parking lot would be in phase 1, the corner unit would be in phase 1. This may fall into the same kind of scenario. He's probably not passionate about being in 2 phases, but he asked that we could do it in 2 phases. But unlike Mr. Shaban's property, I don't think there'd be any conflict if we decided to build those buildings in the future. And with that in mind, I'm available for any questions you may have regarding Maple Key Townhomes.
Questions?
Are these units, I remember when we went over this before, are they 2.5 stories essentially? Is that the?
They are. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure on the 3rd floor. Obviously, the rooftop patio's there, and some of that roof, where that dormer is, I believe that's a covered area. You have a little bit of outdoor area under cover. There's probably more just, I'm not sure if there's a bedroom up top. I'm not sure exactly what happens on the 3rd floor.
So my only concern would be, and what we talked about earlier with the overlay for downtown, would this fall in where there's a property next to it that's at least 2 stories? So that would be my question that I would want to know. Because, I mean, I know that we haven't adopted that overlay yet, but it would seem irresponsible to put planning out there for something we know that we're immediately going to kind of not have. So that would be my only question.
And I think that's a great consideration, because I think, like I mentioned, that 3rd floor on a lot of these is really becoming your outdoor living space, and whether that has a structure associated with it or an arbor, you know, that's going to add a little bit of elevation to the buildings, but that's kind of the mode that a lot of these buildings are tracking in.
And again, I think the property's fantastic. I really do. I just want to make sure we're being consistent.
Right.
And I want to ask a just general question, looking at this, and I really appreciate the changes that you made to the facades and just the general look of them. It's a very nice improvement.
Thank you.
When we see these images, and all of the windows in these units have plantation shutters on the inside, and that is makes a very big difference to the outdoor look. So are there going to be plantation shutters inside all of these houses on every single window, front, side, and back?
Definitely not a commitment to pattern book. That may be architectural license there a little bit, Ms. Jones, as far as that's concerned. I think they're projecting mullions in the windows to give the windows some detail. I'm not sure if they're really trying to project, what kind of shutters will be on the inside. I think we did add the shutters to the outside to add some detail.
That makes a big difference. But the plantation shutters on the inside, That's why I had to get down under the desk over here a minute ago and pull out my original plan book. But the plantation shutters were actually on the first version of this as well. That's just one of those things that, kind of
That's a great observation. I
bothers
don't.
me if I see something that looks like this, and then when we go back and look at it, once it's constructed, the little window boxes that get added on, and all these things that look so pretty in our pictures.
Yeah.
I want them to look like that when I drive by it and look at it 18 months, 2 years from now.
I agree.
Just saying.
Would you like me to have them remove the plantation shutters just for authenticity?
I would not. They're there.
Okay.
I'm not taking them out in the motion that we make, if you want to.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry about that. We hadn't had the public hearing yet, but
I appreciate the thought.
other questions, comments?
So,
We'll open the public hearing then. Let's see if anybody wants to come forward to speak on this item. Okay. We'll close the public hearing. What other comments, questions from the Planning Commission or staff?
So I guess I would like a little bit more clarity on what Chase said. I mean, I don't think we can judge ourselves, or we can hold ourselves to a standard that's not been put in place yet. But this would be a good example of what the city core overlay would bring to the city from the standpoint of what you can and can't put beside them. I wish the people that left earlier were here now, and they would be able to see, okay, this will protect you from a 3-story. Now, from my point of view, this is a great project. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's.
But if we had that city core overlay in, this project could not go forward.
So there are.
Unless you tell me different.
There, within that city core overlay, as it is currently written, there are certain nodes, intersections where
Correct. So
higher
is this
density, and I think that this is one of the nodes.
So this would be urban, so you could do
Yes,
that. So,
yes.
okay. Good clarification.
Yes.
But that also means, though, that the people need to understand what node they're in.
Yep.
Because I know down Castle Street, it's an urban node, and you could do this because it's encouraged to get to 3 stories. But again, they would see the types of protections that are being put in place, as opposed to seeing it a different way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know earlier we were somewhat accused of being deceptive, and what we don't want to be is deceptive. Our intentions are to truly be as transparent as we possibly can, and for the public to understand how we're doing and what we're doing. The most commented project that's going on in downtown Murfreesboro right now, for me, is the corner of Olive and Church. And
Yeah.
it's because of the distance between the house and the project itself, and some people feeling that it's out of the character of the neighborhood. There was nothing prohibiting it at that point. I'm not sure, even with what you just said, Donald, that there would be anything prohibiting it with the overlay, because it is a corner. And if corners are going to be looked at differently, we need to make sure that the public understands that corner lots will be looked at completely differently than any other lots on the street, maybe. So that now if the corner lot gets purchased by an individual who wants to develop it and buys 3 lots that are attached to that lot up the road, I'm not sure how you handle that, because all of a sudden you've got a very long corner lot that may extend to half a block, and they may come in and say, this is what we want to build on those lots. So I think there's a challenge there that we're going to have to deal with in the future if we start saying corner lots are treated differently than what your basic overlay is. But I mean, from what I understood in the presentation earlier, when we talked about the core overlay, that you wouldn't be able to build more than a two-story house next to a single-story house, because you wouldn't be able to build more than a story and a half, which we're rounding up. But this here looks like a 3.5 story to me, even though the dormers on the top are, I mean, I think I'd do some kind of a arched window or a vaulted roof or something, ceiling inside, if I had those windows in the unit that I was building. I don't know what the plans show, but but I think this would be hard to justify with the explanation that we gave earlier, with what it's located next to. Now, at this point, it's been deferred and it's not in effect, and I guess we need to judge it on the standards that we're using yesterday and last week and today. But, you know, I like the project. I think it's very attractive. I think it's a good location for it. I mean, I'm not trying to say I don't like the project at all. I think it's, and the color combinations and stuff look much more attractive than they did in the initial book. So I think it's a really good project. I like it. I even like the location of it. Would like to see that corner developed, but I do have somewhat concerns with when we start picking out which corners are. That discretion seems to be a little bit going to the more than I think you want to take credit or blame for. If we start just exempting every corner in town to say, well, you can build something differently than what everything else on the block is.
Okay, if you don't mind, I would like to take just a second to respond.
Yeah, please.
This corner is defined as, in that CCO, as an urban residential node, which would allow for higher building. However, it would still be capped at 50% higher than the nearest adjacent building. I was under the impression that there was a 2-story building next to this. There's not. There's a 1.5. There are 1.5-story buildings. So no, under the CCO, this would not. The idea of the CCO is that even if you have higher allowances at certain places, you still can only go 50% higher than the highest adjacent building. The idea is that we would gradually raise buildings over a period of time.
Right.
So no, I want to be very clear, upon looking and seeing that these are 1.5-story houses around, this would not be permitted under the CCO. Now, the CCO certainly, if it were adopted, it allows for people to still come through with a planned development. And in that case, if you come through with a planned development, you would not necessarily be subject to those standards. It would be up to the Planning Commission and the City Council to determine which of those standards to apply. So I don't think that we're being inconsistent. I don't think that I've said anything that's incorrect, other than going and looking at a map and saying, oh, those are 1.5-story houses around. They're not 2-story houses. So in that way, by saying, yeah, a 3-story house would be allowed there, I would be incorrect.
And so you're saying, though, if it was a 1.5-story house, then under the CCO guidelines, that it could only be a 2-story?
I think that would be right. I don't know how you do 50% over
yeah,
a 1.5.
50%.
Right?
Okay, so
Right.
then we might have a 3-story.
Right.
I mean,
right. If there was an adjacent 2-story house, then a 3-story house would be A-OK with the CCO.
So technically, because we've talked about, technically on this corner, you could actually do a 3-story. But the unit that's next to the house that's 1.5-story would have to be shorter. You have to stair step it up. So on this, there's actually 4 units. In this lot, the 3-story one could go up on the corner, but on the other lot, you would have to be between the 1.5-story and the 3-story.
I'm looking at page 6 on the existing conditions, and I'm not seeing a single thing on here that looks like a 1.5 stories. There's not a gable roof, there's not a dormer, there's not a...
I got on his computer and there's not a...
Well, it's 2 pieces of property, actually. Unless they redo it.
well, but one thing that kind of, I realized that we had this in our first public hearing to talk about potentially these new guidelines, but we deferred that indefinitely. We have a plan before us that is something that we need to look at, I would think, based on what our current zoning is. And just because we have a potential new zoning overlay out there that we might approve someday, I think we have a hard time. I mean, I understand how trying to be concerned and making sure we're thinking about all of that, and I think that's what we do, but I don't think we can stop what we're doing with this one based on the fact we might one day have an overlay
But in
that
the
changes.
presentation we did earlier, Kathy, we made the comment that we're doing this to protect the neighborhood around it. And yet, you know, and I think that we need to, personally, I think we need to approve it based on its merits today and what the rules are today and how they exist yesterday and a week ago and today. However, I do think that this would be prohibited.
Yes.
In
As
the
it is, it
interpretation.
would be.
If it had been approved earlier, I don't even know that we could
But
have approved
I
it.
still don't feel like it's hurting or not protecting the neighborhood.
I
I
would-
understand it wouldn't, you know, based on what we're proposing, that it wouldn't be, but the particular project we're looking at, I don't feel like it is a detriment to the neighborhood, whatever the overlay is.
The only thing I would say to that would be, right now, the depiction that we see is not next to that other house. So if you go down, what is it, not Maple, is it Maple?
Maple.
If you go down Maple and you saw this plan, and it was depicted right next to that one-story house, you'd probably make a different decision. The depictions that we see right here are not, it's only showing that corner lot. So it would be a little bit different if we saw the whole plan holistically. But again, my opinion is exactly yours. We have to vote based on what we have in place today.
Yeah. And on page 9, I mean, what we see around the house is a beautiful green space that really isn't there. I mean, there are houses on those properties adjacent to it, so.
So would you approve just a three-story unit, or would you want to see the two-story?
I think based on the criteria that we're looking at today, without any understanding whether or not there may or may not ever be a common or a core district that overlays this, I think we have to judge it on its merits today. But I think it would have been somewhat more challenging had we approved the overlay at the start of this meeting to said, we just said, we're not going to do this, and here we do it. Since we deferred it indefinitely, I think that we have to rule it on the merits of what's presented to us and what the rules are that we're playing by today.
Well, and the only comment I would add is just for Mr. Anthony's sake, that these particular corners were carved out as nodes to be able to do some of those special things. So it's not like we didn't have a provision that allowed that.
Yeah. Well, I think to be clear, I think it's the urban district. It's not a node that allows the 3 stories, right? You could do it in an urban district.
It was called urban residential node, and so there were a handful of carve-outs for that.
But it's not, is it the corner or is it the whole street?
I believe that here it's the corner. It's the intersection, if I remember. I don't have that map right in front of me, but I do want to point out, this project you would look at independently of the CCO. I mean, you might invoke some of the CCO standards into it, but this is a planned development that you're being asked about. Right. And people would still, with the CCO, would still be able to come in and ask for planned development that doesn't follow any of those standards. So
It's a good
I'll
point.
leave it at that.
One thing that I might add, I zoomed in on the aerial photograph that Mr. Roundtree included in his pattern book, and just a glance at the lot to the north, it appears that the house on the lot to the north is set up against the northern property line, not against the common property line with this particular property. So it appears that it wouldn't be a situation where it would be directly across the property line. It looks like there's a little bit of separation from that common property line.
This is difficult for me. I understand everybody, what their comments And I understand that we ought to do this on the merit and the rules that we have today, but it's difficult for me to go through this process after the conversation that we had earlier. You know, my guess is that at some point that the overlay will be intact, based upon the guarantees that we are trying to keep the downtown area as it is, and it is a protection piece. I also understand that as planned development, as you all said, you could pick parcels out based upon having planned development, that we could do something differently, but the whole reason why that aspect of the core overlay is there and not going over 1.5 times is to protect the surrounding houses. I mean, I'm all for this development itself, but I have great concerns over what we went through earlier, and then willing to approve this. Just my opinion.
You'd still want to see a two-story version of this.
Correct. I just, anyway.
Is there any limit on a PRD, how high you could go? I mean, is there?
No, I think that's an individualized standard for the plan development.
But I only think, like, when we look at properties, for example, that have the GDO overlay, don't we still make them comply with everything that the GDO?
Absolutely. I think, I don't know, I'll ask Margaret Ann, the GDO may be written in a different manner. Margaret Ann may be much more persistent about making sure that those standards are satisfied even in plan developments.
I generally tell them that you won't consider an exception to it in the GDO, although there are exceptions to GDO standards with at least one plan development. It's older, it's not one of the newer things. It can happen, they have to be specific. The zoning ordinance says specifically you have to say what the exception is, and that's how you get it. But it's not easy, and it's not advised by staff. Because the purpose of a plan development is to do a creative design, something innovative, something that fits the property, and not just a way to get out of standards. So generally, with the GDO being more architectural standards, there's not really good, it doesn't really attribute to better design. An example where they got out of the GDO standard with the plan development is Henley Station Phase 1. Vinyl was absolutely prohibited, but with that one, it was approved with vinyl on the interior. And so that's an example of getting out of it. And I think that after the fact, I heard back from many people saying, let's not do that again, and we haven't. So it's happened, but it's not common.
So, at least from my point of view, I would suggest that we try to do, or figure out a way to do that here too. Because if we go down the path of saying that you're protected, and we go down the path of building a bunch of 3- and 4-story houses, they're gonna come back here ready to hang us. So if there's a way to do that, I would suggest that we probably do that.
We can, I think we can write some very similar language into the CCO regulations.
I appreciate Mr. Halliburton's comments. I like the product and what we're doing. I think it's good for Murfreesboro. I'm willing to make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, 2 noes. Motion passes. All right, our next next item is zoning application for approximately 13.9 acres located along North Tennessee Boulevard to be rezoned from CF to PRD. Brookwood Point PRD. Old South Properties, Inc. is the applicant. Ms. Kerr.
Thank you, Chair Jones. Members of Planning Commission, this property is located along the northeast side of North Tennessee Boulevard, north of East Northfield Boulevard, and south of Northwood subdivision. The property consists of 13.9 acres. The property is currently underdeveloped and zoned commercial fringe district. The applicant wishes to rezone the property to planned residential district. The proposed PRD consists of 53-unit townhome development, and the proposed gross density would be 3.8 dwellings per units per acre. In 2017, the applicant submitted a similar PRD request with 82 units, which was deferred by City Council in July of 2017, after which the public hearing was held in order for the applicant to conduct a wetlands study. Wetlands were identified, causing this modification to the plan. The development will have no access, will only have access through North Tennessee Boulevard, and the proposed development would include 15 buildings consisting of 1- and 2-story townhouse units. The setbacks for the development would be 25 feet on the front, 15 feet on the sides, and 20 feet on the rear. The adjacent land uses is RS-15 zone, which is the Northwoods subdivision to the north and northeast. To the east is an RM-16 zone, which is the Wycliffe Court multifamily residential development. And to the west is a PRD retreat of Northwoods townhome development. And to the south is CF zone, which is currently vacant property. The 2035 comprehensive plan recommends that neighborhood commercial is the most appropriate land use character for the subject property. Characteristics of neighborhood commercial includes low intensity commercial land uses, generally about the same scale and intensity level as residential development within the suburban residential area, and clustered at intersections of community collector thoroughfares. Examples of uses of this land character would include professional offices, convenience stores, dry cleaners, post office, coffee shops, and drugstores. Compatible zoning districts are commercial local, commercial fringe, commercial medical residential, commercial medical residential, section 8. The proposed single-family residential attached use in this PRD request is not consistent with the commercial uses recommended in the neighborhood commercial land use character. The Planning Commission will need to discuss this zoning request and determine if this is an appropriate instance to deviate from the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. Planning staff is also currently working to update the 2035 comprehensive plan, and we should have that to you in the coming months. The applicant is requesting 3 exceptions in the pattern book before you. One is the requirement that stormwater pond be screened on all sides. The pattern book requests that no landscape screening will be required on the west or the internal side of the detention pond. Also, the applicant requests to be required to replace the dumpster and enclosure with private trash carts, and those trash carts will be kept in the garage, and they will provide a private haul removal for their solid waste. The third exception is to have 4-foot sidewalks throughout the development, except where sidewalks are adjacent to parking areas, where the sidewalks will be 7 foot. A copy of the proposed pattern book is in your agenda packages, and Matt Taylor with SEC is here to represent the applicant and has a short presentation to show you, after which Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing and formulate a recommendation for City Council. I will be available to answer any questions after Mr. Taylor's presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr.
Thank you, Ms. Kerr. Members of the Planning Commission, Matt Taylor again of SEC here in town. I do have a brief presentation. Mr. Dan Bobo of Old South Properties, the applicant, is here as well if you should have any questions for him. This is Brookwood Point. The ones of you that have been on the commission for a couple of years probably recognize this, or maybe you've chosen to forget. But this project is very similar to what we brought forth 12 to 18 months ago, in that it's still the townhouse development. The layout is almost identical with the exception of where the wetlands were found. And so very similar product and very similar layout. Just to reorient you, this property is on the north side of North Tennessee, away from the intersection with Northfield Boulevard. It's currently hardwoods on the eastern portion and then some scrub on the western portion of the site. The western portion is more scrub because it was used for some stockpiles and construction laydown areas on previous projects that we'll be cleaning up with the project. The zoning, as Ms. Kerr said, was CF. That's been in place for several years. And we think this is one of those locations where the comprehensive plan just took the existing zoning and did not really give a recommendation there. We feel like the commercial fringe is better suited to the other side of North Tennessee, where it'll align with Northfield Boulevard, much like the southeast corner of the intersection of North Tennessee and Northfield Boulevard. Here is in front of the property looking back to the east along North Tennessee. This is on the western portion. You can see some of that construction debris and stockpile that I mentioned earlier. This is from the west looking toward the east. You can start to see some of the hardwoods. This is a good example of some of the scrub that we have on site. Again, this is a PRD, planned residential district, that we've proposed to allow for the 53 townhouses. That's a reduction of about 30 from the original plan. The dark green area that you see on the right-hand part of the screen here, that is the wetlands that were platted and will be preserved through a T-deck and the core. Our density here will be just under 4 units to the acre. As usual, our utilities will be all underground. And then this, again, will be platted through an HPR. And so everything outside of the 4 walls will be considered common area. That will be maintained by an HOA, which will be managed by a third-party association. A very walkable community, sidewalks along both sides of all streets, some internal trails, and those sidewalks connect back into the network that is on North Tennessee and then eventually back out to Northfield Boulevard. We have planned for landscape buffer along the north side where we abut Northwood subdivision. That's for obviously a land use transition there. We've also planned for some buffering along North Tennessee. That's more for quality of life of our residents and aesthetics for them to be able to enjoy the rear of those units. As Ms. Kerr said, we have planned for individual carts on the solid waste pickup. This product, if you're familiar with the Rockbridge Cove over off Lascassas Highway near the Kroger, is the exact same product. We anticipate very similar demographics, and that's the same setup they have there as the carts, and that has worked very well for them. I think that development unit-wise may be a little larger than this one actually, but this one we'd like to do the same thing. Our streets, again, will be private pickup in this location as well. The units will all have 2-car garages. So there'll be a mixture of 1- and 2-story homes. Those garages will be large enough to house 2 SUVs. They'll start at 1,500 square feet and go up to well over 2,500 square feet in size. Here's some examples of the product that was built over on Rockbridge Cove. High quality materials, brick, stone, get a lot of varying roof planes along the front. And then again, we alternate those garages to create some of those larger green spaces to help with the streetscape as you drive internal to the development. The rear, each of our owners will get a fenced-in patio yard area, and then some of them even elect to have a screened-in sunroom. Amenities, have a nice entrance sign that will match the materials located within the development itself. And then because of our demographic, we anticipate this to be an older empty nester community, which is what we've seen in other locations of similar product types. They're not looking for playgrounds, they're not looking for pools necessarily, they're looking for socialization and a little bit of light exercise for walking. And so what we've planned is obviously our sidewalks internal on all streets, but then we've also planned kind of a more formal walking trail in this location highlighted in yellow. That'll be have some benches, and we'll also do some covered swings. That trail will be amenitized and made colored and have some textures, and then we'll have some pavers around some of those sitting areas along with beefed up landscape, and to really try to attract people out and utilize this area. And then we are also going to continue the 4-rail, I call it a horse rail fence. It is existing on the development to the west of this, and so we want to continue that along North Tennessee to try to create that cohesive feel as you drive along North Tennessee, and that'll be complemented by our buffering and landscaping along that same route. Access, as Ms. Kerr said, we'll have one access point on North Tennessee. The properties around us have already developed and have not stubbed anything into this property, so we only have one opportunity for access. We wanted to be as far away from the curve of North Tennessee as possible, so we located on the western portion. That will be a 3-lane section where it intersects with North Tennessee. And again, all of our streets internal will be private. So I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing.
Mr. Taylor, anybody got questions before the public hearing?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item. Okay. Close the public hearing. Other questions or comments from the Planning Commission?
Ronnie, you may have, or Mr. Martin, you may have some comment on this as well as I do. In the workshop we were in today, we discussed curbside pickup. And looking at, just for example, units 26, 27, 28, 45, 40, 43, 44, 45, down here in the lower right-hand corner on page 13. How in the world is a garbage truck going to access those drives for curbside pickup?
If I can, Mr. Smotherman, I'll save you a little conversation. We will have a private hauler here, so it will not be the city coming to pick up.
Okay, so they'll manually pick them up then? So, okay.
They will, or they'll back up. They may be willing, since we're paying them, to back up a little further to get their trash.
There you go. Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Anything else?
No further questions. I make a motion we approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
I'm sure there's not a requirement for the term.
And what looks to be our last item tonight, under our public hearing section, will be a zoning application for approximately 2.88 acres located at 1126 Rucker Lane to amend the Marymount Springs PUD to add tavern use. Jeff and Sheriff Brown are the applicants. Ms. Rush, welcome.
Madam Chair, may I make a quick comment?
Yes, please.
I have a conflict. I've been working with the Browns and may be involved in this project, so I'll abstain from voting and from commenting.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martin?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. The subject property is located at 1126 Rucker Lane. It's located just south of the intersection of Muirwood Boulevard. It's approximately 2.88 acres and is developed with the historic Marymount Mansion. This building was built approximately 1860, and it was lived in for many years, but it has been vacant for many years and has fallen into disrepair. This property is part of the Marymount Springs Planned Unit Development, which was originally approved in 2005. It was subsequently amended in 2013 to include commercial uses for the Marymount Mansion, including items like a bed and breakfast, restaurant, office use, and event facility. This current zoning request is to amend the pattern book for the plan unit development to add tavern as a use because the applicants are wishing to establish an upscale wine bar there where they would serve wine, beer, bourbon, and whiskey on site. They also wish to establish an event facility where they would have weddings, bridal showers, birthday parties at this facility for rent. Neighborhood was held on April 9th, 2019 by the applicant and their representative, Mr. Clyde Roundtree, Huddleston Steel. There were several people that did show up, approximately 40, and comments were made primarily about potential impacts for traffic, noise, and if the users or the applicants would ever move on in the future, who may occupy this building and what kind of use or how they would operate it was a bit of a concern. To help minimize all those concerns, staff had recommended to the applicant to add specific standards or conditions limiting the hours of operation, noise, not having amplification outdoors. Those are items that are all included in the pattern book that they had agreed to. Just to let you know, the adjacent properties are primarily single-family residential, so this was something that was important to them. The future land use map for the Murfreesboro 2035 comprehensive plan shows this as an auto-urban residential land use site as the most appropriate. And it was part of the zoning that was done, occurred before the 2035 comprehensive plan was adopted. And it was not picked up as a commercial potential use, even though commercial was new uses that were allowed in it. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission consider revising that designation at a future date for this particular land use map at this site. As indicated, Mr. Roundtree of Huddleston Steel is the applicant's representative. He's here tonight to make a brief presentation, and I believe the applicants are here as well. I'm happy to answer any questions from the commission and will be available after the presentation as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rush. Any questions before we hear from Mr. Roundtree? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Chairwoman Jones, commissioners, staff, my name is Clyde Roundtree, Huddleston Steel Engineering, and I'm really excited to present you Marymount Springs Wine Bar, the Black Crow Wine Bar. This has been a really interesting project to work on. It's been a privilege to work with Jeff and Sheriff Brown. They're here tonight. They're the ones that are considering purchasing the home in order to have this business. This has been a journey for them. They're new at this as well, going through the zoning process, and they thought they'd be serving wine tonight and about heading home, but it's been a journey for them to get to this point. We're excited about this project because it's really exciting because you'll hear about their passion. They're going to speak during the public hearing portion. But as you know, the house is an existing home, still has a really good exterior. It's a beautiful home on about 3 acres of land, and they would like to propose a new type of business in this particular facility, and it just happened to be that it's approved for a bed and breakfast, it's approved for a restaurant, but it's not approved for a tavern. And our ordinances currently do not have any other distinction other than tavern, so that's really kind of what we've run into is it's not a tavern. If you go to this bar, or this wine bar in the evening, it will not have any semblance of a tavern. It's much more of a classy, quiet, after hours, after business hours type of place to go and relax. So we're kind of working through the stigmatism and the stereotypes of taverns that have associated with them. So with that in mind, they're going to explain a little bit more about that, but there'll be some images that'll help you kind of understand the ambiance that they'd like to create. As was mentioned, it's surrounded by Marymount Springs subdivision, single-family residences all around the perimeter of the property. And, it's in the PUD, as was mentioned as well. So our master plan has us several different components. The house will stay intact with this master plan, obviously. Our commitment is to really make sure that the historical character of the outside of the house is preserved. To the best of our ability, we want to keep the inside of the house looking much like it would historically.
However, it will be altered from the floor plan that is currently there. We do hope in the future, if the business is successful or when the business is successful, to add a courtyard area to the rear portion of the house, and that'll allow them to kind of expand the overall capacity of the building for different kind of functions. We have 68 parking spaces that have been allocated towards the property over time, and there's a 20 by 20 storage building that's also associated with the potential development. We're committed to having a perimeter planting around the property to make sure that it has its own containment visually, that the landscape buffer along the perimeter will definitely screen the premises from the neighbors. The house is beautiful, the land is beautiful, everything about this property is a really pretty project. So it's one of those kind of things where I think the neighbors would love to see the house, but really our commitment is to make sure it's best possible to limit any sort of encroachment upon their lives from this particular piece of property. Worked very closely with staff on making sure that all the noise ordinance was well observed and making sure that to our best of our abilities we could prohibit any sort of noise intrusion to the adjacent neighbors. We ran into a little challenge in our neighborhood meeting because the pool in Maramont Springs is a very active pool. I think it's more active than they could imagine. I think it's loud, and I think there's some rules that get challenged often, maybe during the summer, as far as noise and use during the evening. So that came into our neighborhood meeting as a real concern. The second concern was, what if the business fails and now it's zoned as a tavern? So we've done it best we could in the pattern book to try to protect against that from happening. And you can read in that, but I'll try to elaborate on a few of those elements. This is just an image of the courtyard, what we'd love to see help create. It's a 8-foot wall, masonry wall, that'll basically tie into the corners of the existing home and be consistent with character of the existing home. But you can imagine what they're trying to create, a really nice, pleasant space in the evenings, like a night like tonight, to be outside. There are 2 existing trees that would be within the courtyard to kind of bring it a little bit more of an ambiance and provide some neat lighting from the trees. This is the house where it currently stands, and this is where it really becomes a passion project, because the Browns have been working through this for many months, trying to purchase this and try to get rezoned, and they watch their, basically something they really have a passion for, just getting worse and worse shape. The home is being constantly broken into, it's being used as a party spot, it's just falling apart. So their vision for this home is exciting, but it becomes more and more challenging as each day goes by without the opportunity to move forward. So you can see the existing wallpaper and a mantle, those kind of things. This home it's a neat house, but it needs a lot of work, and they know that. But we wanted to make sure you understood what kind of condition it was in. These are not photo altered or anything like that. That is the condition of the home as it currently sits. And that's what they dream of, a place that would be restored, a place that would be elegant. You can only imagine having the opportunity after a long planning commission meeting to go out and have a glass of wine, but unfortunately it'll be closed by the time we get out here. But the fact of the matter is it provides us an option. It provides us an option. It provides Murfreesboro an option, and they have a vision for this. They've seen this done. The comparable is AJ's in Franklin. That is a very similar business model as what they would like to present. This home is a little bit larger than AJ's, but has a little more flexibility, a little more land associated with it. But I feel like the vision they have is very unique to Murfreesboro. I think it'd be a real asset to Murfreesboro. And I really think it's something that people will come from outside of Murfreesboro to enjoy, because I think it's a unique venue. And we've learned a lot about venues in the last few years, where everyone wants to try to have one. But one of the things we learned about venues is they don't all have to be 10,000 square foot buildings with a barn. This would provide another niche that I think would be very important to fill. And I could see the bachelorette parties, I could see, office, Christmas parties, things were a much smaller scale. The overall capacity of the building is about 125 people, is what we're planning on max. So it's really limiting itself in terms of what it could really do as far as overall venue programming. Another image, there will be a cigar room associated with the facility, and maybe some library books as well. And you just see, that's the vision, that's the dream that they would like to see happen. And I'm excited because I think the timing, Murfreesboro is growing in such a way that it could really use a facility like this. They've got a passion for the structure, and something needs to be done soon, or that structure is going to become almost uninhabitable. And I hopefully the timing will work out for them to be able to get the zoning correct and just jump in there and get this thing moving forward. So with that in mind, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. I think the Browns will let me be a part of this, and I think it could be a really neat asset to the city of Murfreesboro if it moves forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Roundtree. Questions for Mr. Roundtree before we open the public hearing? Okay.
I would say this real quick. As part of my homework, I went to JJ's in Franklin because I really wanted to see what it was about, if there was any sort of semblance of the concerns that the neighbors had, and it really has none of that. And most of the things you associated with a bar, with a tavern, are not present at all in this particular facility. And they really encourage any of the planning commissioners, any of the council members to go to HA's or JJ's if they can in Franklin to kind of see the setting. It really helps. It helped me a lot to understand exactly what we're getting into. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We will open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak on this item.
Hi, my name's Robert Fraze. I live at 1931 Rolling Creek Drive, which is in Marymount Springs. And I'm also part of the advisory board of directors for the HOA in Marymount as well. And we've had quite a bit of discussion about this project. And I, for one, am excited about having a wine bar someplace here in Murfreesboro. I'm not excited about having it backing up to the homes in Marymount Springs. Marymount Springs is a very quiet neighborhood. Yeah, we do have 12 weeks of the pool being open. But the thing is what's being brought to your attention is that pool can be heard a long ways away in our neighborhood because it is so quiet. All right, the only distraction we have is Rucker Lane, which also brings to the point that Rucker Lane, doesn't need a bunch of folks that have been, sipping on wine and bourbon getting out on that road, which is strictly residential on either side of that road all the way to Highway 96. So the weekend hours are going to be at midnight. All right, that's Friday and Saturday night. Most people in Marymount are in bed by 10, all right? And there's about 5 or 6 lots that are potentially good old homes. They're going to back up to this thing. And when you actually go out there and look at it, I mean, they are going to be backed up to this facility, all right? And I can't imagine sitting on my porch, at 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night and having to listen to a bridesmaid's party, all right, going on this concrete slab with the walls around it. It's going to be an echo chamber. So, this is, and also the lights. I don't know what the lighting is going to be like this, but it's going to be, there's enough light pollution, in Marymount Springs without having something like this in my backyard. Now, it's not going to be my backyard, and I'm actually kind of surprised that there aren't the developers, for this area that's going to be behind this aren't here talking to you all as well, because I can't imagine if I were buying a lot in the reserve at Marymount that's backed up to this thing, and I didn't know that there was going to be a tavern in my backyard, I would really be upset. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for staying with us so long.
Hi, I'm Sheriff Brown, and I'm one of the hopeful owners of the Marymount Springs. This is the one thing that my husband and I have had some issues with, is because there's not been anything like this in Murfreesboro. And so for them to come up with something, it had to be under a tavern. We did have the neighborhood meeting. Once we did explain to them that this wine establishment that we're trying to have is far from being a tavern. It won't be anything different than if you're in a residence and people are out in their yard and you're hearing. The music is not going to be anything that you're going to hear. It's going to be inside. It's a very laid-back place. As far as if we had a bachelorette party, it is not where you would have it like in Nashville. They would come in, they would sit down, and they would have wine and something to eat. And if we had parties, the rooms are upstairs, we would finish it, so that there can be continual going on downstairs for our patrons, as well as offering things for private parties. But we're here to
bring something to Murfreesboro that I think that a lot of people that we have talked about are very excited about. If you think about it, most people have to either go to JJ's, that's an hour away, then they get back on the freeway and drive, or they're going to Nashville, and then they have to either decide to use a Uber or spend the night there because they go down there and they go to the restaurants. They're putting their money into the economy for Franklin or for Nashville. And this is something that we can offer to Murfreesboro and the people that live here. Also bringing people in from other places. When we were doing this, we found that in the historical part of it, it would be very exciting for Murfreesboro because it's the cornerstone of your history. My husband and I are from Kansas City, Missouri. And we found this with the help of our agent. And when we started delving into a lot of things, we found out that this place was somewhat of a party place. It was an entertainment center that President Polk and his whole family came down there to the Rutherford Place and enjoyed themselves immensely. So all we're doing is bringing back not only the Tennessee heritage of Murfreesboro, but also providing something that you can be very proud of, that you don't mind going in and having a couple of drinks and then going home afterwards. This is not something where you would be staying there for hours on end. This would be something you go in for an hour, maybe two, and then you go home.
Can I ask you a question while you're up there?
Yes.
So, this area would lend itself, in my opinion, to have outdoor parties with tents and that sort of thing?
No.
Are you planning on doing that? So the only outdoor events would be in this courtyard area that you're talking about, or?
Well, if we had any events, like if we had a wedding, it would be a very small venue type of thing. But our courtyard is just basically for people to go out and sit outside and enjoy themselves sitting outside. We would have couches and chairs and such that they just sit out there, fireplace, and enjoy just the ambiance of the place.
So the wedding could be held outside, is what you're saying?
Yes, but if in the courtyard area, but it would have to be something very small because we realize the amount of people that we could hold. Or it would be during the day where they could have a small reception.
May I ask a question following up on that? I think the answer is no from what you said, but just for a wedding, you never allow the entire space to be rented, for instance, and allow like a tent to be erected so that a wedding could be had there and music would be disrupting these people. That would not be permitted, is correct? Thank you. And no pedal taverns, right, for the no pedal taverns for the bachelorette parties?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. Anybody else? Okay, close the public hearing. Comments, questions?
Ms. Jones and members of the Planning Commission, one thing I did want to mention, though, I don't know that it's in the pattern book that events in tents or that outdoor areas would be, or outdoor events would be limited to just the courtyard, and there might need to be a prohibition specifically placed on that. Ms. Rush may be able to speak to whether or not there is anything that might specifically prohibit that in the pattern book. She's much more familiar with it than I am.
Mr. Plumley's correct. There isn't anything in the pattern book. So if your desire is to add that language, we could craft something up and make sure that that is in there and appropriately control that particular issue.
I think it would be, it doesn't sound like it's their intent at all, but we're all back to this whole, what if this doesn't work, or what if these people choose to sell the property at a later date? I think that would just be a good idea, because that wasn't the intent in the beginning.
Okay.
what does it mean when it says on page 1 that in 2013 it was amended to allow, list several things, one of those is an event facility?
And
So
that was my question.
can they, based on that today, hold weddings and have tents and events?
There's no regulations within the current pattern book to limit noise or events. It's just wide open event facility. So in essence, they could. Fast forward to 2019, we were trying to be more cognizant of the homes that have, are developing in that area. They were planned to be developed before, but now that they're right there, it's kind of just trying to help make sure everyone's good neighbors with each other. But you're correct.
So help me understand then. So today, if they wanted to, what would stop them from starting this business as is?
Their primary interest is the upscale wine bar. They will be offering events, but to make this go financially, they may be able to speak to that. What they informed me was that the wine bar is what will help them maintain this facility and keep it running, and that the events would be occasional.
And Mr. Russell, in its current shape, they would not be able to use it as an event venue until the required site improvements, like a parking lot and.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but they could technically do that.
That's correct. It is zoned today for an event venue. But you would have the ability via this pattern book to put restrictions on future events, reasonable conditions on future events. So you could make the conditions on those more specific with the adoption of this pattern book.
And I'm agreeable to that. My only question is currently, what could they do just existing right now, and the neighbors couldn't do anything about it?
I think right now, with the way that it's written, it's a little bit more wide open. What is forcing them to go through this process is the addition of the tavern use, which is not permitted right now under the current PUD zoning.
Okay. Thank you.
But the hours of operation and stuff that are described in this book are not currently on the property, so this is actually being more restrictive to the property in a sense than what the current restrictions are.
Yeah, it could be seen as kind of a trade-off.
Yeah. And I agree. I don't think it's fair to hold anybody accountable for the noise problem that the pool may have when they're trying to do something on an adjacent piece of property or property surrounding that, because I think there's an unfair judgment there to say that the person's going to abuse the noise ordinances of the city of Murfreesboro, which would be protected by what's written in this book. I think that there's I think there's an opportunity to save this historic house, because obviously if it continues down the road that it's currently going, it's going to only deteriorate. And I mean, having lived in Murfreesboro a long time, I remember the level that the Oakland Mansion got to at one point. And you only have to remember how bad it was, wonderfully restored today and recovered well, but it was on the brink of falling in on itself. And I think this, it may not be the most desirable use. I don't, Ben's, I don't drink wine and don't smoke. I mean, I don't see it's going to benefit me a whole lot either way, but maybe it'd be a good venue for me to go drink a Coke every now and then or something. But but I do think there's an opportunity here to preserve a historical building, at least shore it up and maintain it for some period of time, no matter whether the business succeeds or not. And I certainly hope it does. But I think there's an opportunity here to at least shore the house up, establish it as a viable structure again, and bring it up to code, and so I kind of like the idea, honestly, of and you know, if there's a situation where, you know, drinking and driving and those things become a problem, then that's not unique to Rucker Lane or anywhere else in Murfreesboro. I mean, I certainly would hope that nobody would drink excessively and go drive down our roadways, so.
Madam Chairwoman, if I might add a comment, because Mr. Smotherman brought up the the city's noise ordinance. This property would be subject to the same sound level restrictions that would apply from a sound emanating from one house in the residential subdivision to the adjacent residence. So the fact that you have that the sound is originating in a commercial venue, because the sound is being received at a residence, that is what controls. So, neighbor A and neighbor B, both homeowners, they're subject to a certain sound level both during the daytime and after 10 o'clock at night. Those same limits would apply between this wine bar establishment and the adjacent residences.
Yeah, it's, in the book here, it's actually spelled out very clearly. It shall comply with the City of Murfreesboro Noise Ordinance, Municipal Code, Section 21. So it's very clear that the noise ordinances would be protected.
It also states on page 1 that no outdoor amplification will be permitted. That puts some additional clarification. Also, the fact that there's 39 spaces in Phase 1 and 30 in Phase 2 also limits can't be a field party, much less of a 200 guest wedding.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And the house only accommodates 125 persons.
Oh. Probably in the car. Doing it. Yeah. I would also like to see the right opportunities for the business to succeed. I mean, restaurants are challenging and hard, so to be able to cater to some weddings and some medium-sized events and still have the constraints with the noise. I think this is a nice compromise, and it does put some additional controls.
And oftentimes when people come in and speak against something, I often feel like I almost need to challenge them and say, well, what would you like to see go in there? Because anything that goes into this property, whether it be a residential use or whatever the use might be, is going to have inherent noises and traffic and things that go on with any home or business. So, I think the neighbors would much rather see this developed and succeed than to see, somebody come in and request a PRD and want to put apartments that back up to their property and multifamily housing or something like that, where this historical structure's in their backyard now. Relative to the use. I mean, I think I would rather have this behind my house than, 20 kids in a basketball court, so.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Motions?
If not, I'll move for approval subject to all staff comments.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Abstain.
One abstention.
Ms. Jones, could I get a clarification on something, just so that we advise Mr. Roundtree correctly? Is that to exclude outdoor functions except within the courtyard area? Would that be a part of the motion? There was some discussion on that earlier.
It's not part of mine.
Okay.
We've not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And so that ends our public hearings, and do we have some other staff reports and other business?
There's going to be control.
I might just thank Mr. Tucker for being here with us tonight. Now, normally, Mr. Ives might have several other items to add right now. Did he not give you a long list to bring us?
I have no items.
Oh, God.
I think he's our new favorite attorney.
All right, if there's no other business, we stand adjourned. Thanks a lot.